Welcome back, fight fans, to the Career Profiles podcast with me, your host Sean, joined as always by my compatriot Johnston for this episode, all about the Bear, Charles Liston, aka Sonny Liston, and an episode which was requested by one of our listeners, Tom Gallagher. Thank you, Tom, for requesting this and many other episodes. We're happy to be putting this one out there for you guys to listen to. Now, before we get into this episode, we have done a Darker Side of Boxing episode on Sonny Liston, which explores more of the darker side of his life. Whilst we've not forgotten about the details for this episode, before you start getting into this story, if you've not already heard that episode, we'd also recommend you to go and listen to that, The Mysterious Life and Death of Sonny Liston. But this episode focuses more on a lot of the stories inside and outside of the ring, which we didn't cover for that episode. So with that in mind, Johnston, we've got a great episode on a man we felt so endeared to when covering his life and times previously for our Darker Side of Boxing series. And I think doing the research to add more detail for this episode has only reaffirmed what I already thought about Sonny Liston, which was he was a troubled individual that just wanted to be loved.
Yeah, it's nice to sort of do a career profile on Sonny Liston after doing our Darker Side of Boxing side of his life, and we didn't necessarily go into too many of his fights, but this time we will be going into each fight with a bit more detail. And and obviously we can't neglect the fact of how his life ended, so we will be touching on some of the same stuff we mentioned in that Darker Side of Boxing episode, but to bring his career and that all into one, I just think it makes of a great story. And as we felt before, where we felt a bit sorry for Sonny, I don't think that changes.
So going right to the beginning, which has always been a talking point of his life, he was born Charles L. Liston, aka, as we know him, Sonny Liston. You know, he was born on a tenant farm in Stanislaus, Arkansas in the USA, but the exact date of his birth has always been surrounded by mystery. Sonny himself believed his date of birth was May the 8th, 1932, and he used this for official purposes, and he was actually quoted in a newspaper in 1962 as saying, "Anybody who says I'm not 30 is calling my mama a liar." Although one writer concluded that Liston's most plausible date of birth was July the 22nd, 1930, citing census records and statements from his mother, Helen Liston, during her lifetime. She confused matters even further when she was quoted as saying, "I think it was the 18th of January 1932. I know he was born in January in 1932. It was cold in January." The other possible dates of birth changed yet again when investigating his arrest record, which suggested that he was born in either 1927 or in 1928. In the book Sonny Liston, His Life, Strife and the Phantom Punch by Rob Steen, he summed up the times perfectly by writing, "Delivered by midwives, children born to black families in Arkansas during the Depression were frequently left unrecorded. Unwanted statistics are buried beneath a pile of prejudice." What we do know is that he was born into a sharecropping family who farmed the poor land of the Morledge Plantation near Johnson Township in St. Francis County, Arkansas. His mother and father, Tobe Liston, had moved to Arkansas in 1916 and began renting the land from a black farm operator named Pat Heron. They laboured the cotton fields together, growing peanuts, corn, sorghum, molasses, sweet potatoes, hogs, cows, and chickens. And Helen recalled later in life, "We had to raise what we ate, and then buy shoes and clothes. Home was a little shabby, a little old 4-room house, and it was cold."
So Sonny was the 24th born out of 25 on his father's side. Toby had 16 other children before he met Helen Baskin, who had also given birth 11 times before she married Toby, and together they had another 9, Sonny being the last but one. When Sonny was born, his mother recalled the midwife saying, "Ain't he got big hands for such a teeny weeny baby? He's going to be a boxer." And according to Sonny, His small-framed and skinny father was abusive to him and all of his children, beating them on a regular basis. Sonny even bore the scars of those excessive beatings when he started boxing, and once said, "The only thing my old man ever gave me was a beating." He spoke in more detail about his upbringing to the Chicago American newspaper. "I can understand the reason for my failings. When I was a kid, I had nothing but a lot of brothers and sisters, a helpless mother, and a father who didn't care about a single one of us. We grew up like heathens. We hardly had enough food to keep from starving, no shoes, only a few clothes, and nobody to help us escape from the horrible life we lived." Now, his mother, on the other hand, played Sonny's recollections down, and she said that Sonny went to school a little bit whenever his daddy let him, but his daddy always had a job for him and the others to do, rain or shine. Their daddy put him out there to work as soon as he was 8 or 9. He said if they, as in the kids, could go to the dinner table, they could go to the fields. He didn't whip them as much as people say he did, but he hollered at them a lot. The biggest thing he did was whoop and holler. He whooped and hollered so much, nobody paid attention to him.
When Sonny had turned into his teens, his mother decided to move to St. Louis, Missouri to seek factory work, leaving Sonny behind in Arkansas with his father. She had heard on the radio that there were several jobs in St. Louis where they'd pay you while you learned. She went straight to work on arrival at a shoe factory and rented 2 upstairs rooms in a house on O'Fallon Street. Following his mother's departure, Sonny continued to work on the fields for his dad and never attended school, and he said later on, "My father worked me hard and he whooped me hard. If he missed a day, I'd feel like saying, 'How come you didn't whip me today?' Even if he was given the chance to extend his education, he probably wouldn't have attended anyway, and he said, 'School? That wasn't for me. The kids made fun of me because I was so big, and I would start fighting.'" A year after his mum left the family home, Sonny decided it was time to join his mother and other siblings after receiving a severe lashing from his father. Now, there are 3 separate stories as to how Sonny arrived in St. Louis. His wife Geraldine believed that he had hiked his way. Shauna Sale, the author of The Murder of Sonny Liston, said he stole a bag of potatoes and then sold them for a bus ticket, while other sources suggested that he thrashed the pecan from his brother-in-law's tree and sold them, travelling with the proceeds. Sonny was a country boy through and through and had no idea what city life was like. He naively thought that he could just ask a stranger where his mother lived and that they would point him in the right direction.
St. Louis was not a city for the faint-hearted. Pete Hamill of the New York Post recalled a town of conmen, hustlers, drifters and pimps, the float Sam and jet Sam of war, a town where a big kid could get jammed up. When Sonny realised that finding his mother was not going to be easy, he was forced to sleep rough on the streets. Resident and one of Sonny's early boxing managers, Monroe Harrison, praised the local police for picking Sonny up from the streets while sleeping in an alleyway and taking him downtown. He said they gave him a place to sleep and they fed him bologna and crackers. They kept him there for 3 days. They liked him. He did little chores and he liked them. He didn't want to leave. They eventually located his mother and they were reunited one night. Helen found Sonny a job in a poultry house and then an ice wagon, while encouraging him to attend night school to compensate for his lack of education. But he was too far behind with his literacy skills and he got teased by the other kids. Sometimes Helen would even follow him to see if he attended, but she recalled, "He didn't go like he should have." As we've mentioned already, Sonny was a big, strapping, he was picked on for his size, so he would end up bashing a few heads for taking the mick out of him. A close friend recalled that Sonny left because he feared that he would badly hurt his fellow pupils, and Sonny recalled that other kids seen me coming out of such small kids' rooms, so they would make fun of me and start laughing, and I start fighting. Then I started playing hooky, and from hooky I led to another thing, so I wound up in the wrong school in the wrong schoolhouse of detention. I was about 14.
Even with the fighting in school and working to help provide for his family at a young age, this was one of the only times that Sonny was at peace in his life, and his relationship with the police was less strained. The only other time Sonny and the police would have respect for one another is the day they escorted his hearse. After dropping out of school, Sonny found it difficult to hold down a full-time job, so like most kids of the times who had no viable income and was illiterate, they would resort to a life of crime. Sonny was the perfect candidate due to his size, lack of education, inexperience and innocence that led him down the wrong path. How he ended up in a detention house is uncertain. He claimed it was because of truancy, but others have suggested that he mugged a boy for $5. He was, however, released back into his mother's custody, but at 16 he took part in a break-in planned by a local gang, and he recalled, "We broke into this restaurant about 2 in the morning and got away, but after we'd gone 10 blocks we decided to stop and get some barbecue, and then the police came along and barbecued us." He was released on probation and was fast becoming a £200 tearaway. His gang hailed him as their toughest, and to prove his strength, according to Harrison, he could lift the front end of a Ford just to prove a point. His crime of choice was muggings and armed robbery, but Sonny not being the sharpest tool in the box, and he was easy to identify by the St. Louis Police Department, not just because of his size, but because he wore a brightly coloured shirt, which actually gave him the nickname, and he was dubbed the Yellow Shirt Bandit. By spring of 1950, Sonny had been arrested for 6 muggings and was about to embark on a moment that would change his life forever.
Well, in that moment, it was an armed robbery of a St. Louis restaurant that found 2 people beaten up for no apparent reason, that turned 18-year-old or 20-year-old or even, as newspapers suggest, 22-year-old, because no one ever quite knew Sonny's age. It turned his life upside down. He was actually caught not long after the robbery by police and was sentenced to 5 years on June 1st, 1950 in the Missouri State Penitentiary of Jefferson City. Convictions were obtained on 2 counts of robbery and 2 of burglary. And Helen recalled, "They say he confessed. I don't know." Sonny never beat around the bush with this conviction. He remembered it very well. And this is what how he described it went down. "We were just always looking for trouble. Someone says, let's stick up the restaurant. And we did. We never got a chance to count the loot. I don't know how much there was in the hall. There were 4 of us and we never split it up or anything. We just did the job like the stupid, crazy, bad kids we." A member of the St. Louis police force who chose to remain anonymous actually summed up the hole Sonny had dug himself. And he said, "Going to the can was the best thing that ever happened to him. If he hadn't gone to the can, he would never have met Father Stevens. And if he never met Father Stevens, he never would have learned how to box. And if he hadn't learned how to box, he'd be dead of a bullet in the back." Shauna Sell's book summed up Sonny's situation in a similar way when he said, "Most people lose their careers when they go to prison, but Sonny found his." Sonny spent 2 years in prison, and it was while inside that he met an associate from the Jefferson City Penitentiary Boxing Club, which was Father Alos Stevens. Now, due to Sonny's size and his street fighting background, he, of course, introduced him to boxing and spotted that he had a talent.
But before he laced up a pair of gloves, Sonny kept his head down during his prison term, and records confirm that he was reprimanded for shooting craps and hollering in the line, but there were no recorded problems with his discipline. He enrolled into a school program and was assigned to the kitchens. To say that Sonny was the model inmate would be incorrect. The hustle and bustle of the St. Louis streets had taught him how to handle himself in difficult situations. A prison is no different from those tough streets. I think the only thing that makes it separate is that all the villains are under one roof in a smaller confined space. As on the outside, the inside was divided into gangs. Hank Caloris runs the West Siders, Nick Barudi the Italians, and Frankie the East Siders, and all 3 forged an alliance to victimise the black prisoners. Author Rob Steen wrote of a story in his book, and it reads, "One day, or so the story goes, he walked across the yard and lashed Callaroo with the back of his hand and muttered, with a quiet but unmistakable menace, 'I'll do that every time I hear you touch the coloured boy. If you don't like it, I'll see you in the hole at 6. Baroody and Frankie were given the same ultimatum. The quartet duly convened at the appointed time in the hole, which was a storage room beneath the cells where fights could be conducted without fear of disturbance. Sonny emerged 5 minutes later, leaving behind all 3 of his adversaries, each staring at the ceiling. Maybe this story is just a myth that adds more credibility to Sonny's status as a bad man, but there is a possibility that this story does bear some truth.
What a story. I hope it is true in a way. So the assistant warden, Bernard Poyery, whose other duties included organising boxing matches, said this of Sonny's character during his time behind bars. And he said, he was a good, quiet inmate. No kind of bully at all. Never had much to say. I don't think he ever had a violation, and if he did, it was a minor. That was very unusual. He was the sort of fellow whose lack of education and intelligence people took advantage of. Well, Sonny was young and he was naive, but he understandably had some anger issues. One day, his fury spilled over, and he ended up being sent to the Catholic chaplain for a time out. Now, it was there that he met, as we've already mentioned, a certain Father Stevens for the first time. And Sonny had immediate respect for the man of the cloth. In turn, Father Stevens saw a softer side to Sonny's personality, and he said he was religious in most general terms, but I don't think he was ever baptized. He got along pretty well with the fellow inmates. He was pretty much a big kid when he came in, and he had a lot of big kid left in him when he left. He was relaxed with people he trusted, especially children. With some, though, he might give a blank stare. You could see him wondering what the angle was. He loved playing tricks on people. He actually had a 2-headed quarter that he had a lot of fun with. I liked him, so I went to work on the parole board on his behalf. I wanted to give him a chance. The priest, come boxing talent spotter, directed Sonny to the ring, and he was pleasantly surprised with his quick improvement. And he said he was 18 or 19 and 202 pounds, clumsy and awkward, but after a while it got very good and cleaned up. They always had trouble getting his gloves on when his hands were wrapped. His hands were so large, astonishing. Boxing kept him out of trouble.
Sonny never lost a fight in prison and quickly became the champion of the penitentiary, but while Father Stevens protested to the parole board for his early release, he was also eager to showcase Liston's boxing potential. It was like a domino effect that Father Stevens explained in detail, and he said, Father Maguire, a fellow priest who was formerly in the newspaper business, was acquainted with Bob Burns, the sports editor of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, which had been sponsoring the local Golden Gloves for years. Maguire went with me to see Burns and try and get Sonny into the Golden Gloves. Burns called former Joe Louis sparring partner Monroe Harrison, a school caretaker who effectively ran the Golden Gloves for the paper, and he came down to the prison with a boxer. That boxer was heavyweight professional Thurman Wilson, who was sent to the prison and for a fight with Sonny, and fought out of veteran trainer Tony Anderson's gym. The first link to organised crime came into the fold in the form of Frank Mitchell, who managed a stable of fighters and was believed to be the frontman of the mobster John Vitale. Mitchell was drafted in to assist, and he recalled, I was to be the bankroll man. If this thing, as in with Sonny, worked out, Bob Burns called Monroe Harrison, Monroe called me, Tony Anderson was consulted. He knew fighters. He could spot them. Snap, like that. And Tony took the best heavyweight in St. Louis to Jefferson City for this scouting trip on Liston. Well, the fight didn't end well for Wilson. He was beaten from pillow to post over 2 rounds. While spitting out his teeth, he said, I don't want no more of him. Others suggest that Wilson said, better get me out of this ring. He's going to kill me.
So while watching on, obviously, Harrison congratulated Father Stevens before saying, you've found me a live one. Anderson was also excited, and he turned to Mitchell and said, "Get him. I can make a champion out of him." Obviously, very happy. Boxing had actually mellowed Sonny as well at this point, and he was able to release his pent-up aggression inside the ring, and was now getting some genuine attention. With his softer side starting to emerge, he went to a prison dance and met a factory worker and future wife, Geraldine Chambers. She already had a daughter, Alifa, from a previous marriage, but that didn't bother Sonny, and they got together. Now, things were beginning to turn positive for Sonny, even though the parole board initially rejected Father Stevens, Burns, Mitchell, and Harrison's attempt to grant him early release. However, in June 1952, Sonny was released into the prison farm, a minimum security unit about 10 miles outside Jefferson City. Finally, on October the 30th, less than halfway through his sentence, Sonny Liston was paroled and placed in the care of Mitchell and Harrison. Now, whether the quartet of Father Stevens, Burns, Mitchell, and Harrison was solely responsible for Sonny's early release is up for debate. Many believe that the Italian-born New York mafia figure Frankie Carbo was involved somewhere down the line, but it would seem more likely that his involvement came after Sonny's amateur career. Now, Mitchell and Harrison became the duo that launched him on a brief and highly successful amateur career. They found him a place to live in Pine Street YMCA and a job with a steel company. By night, he trained either at the Masonic Temple on Olive Street or at the nearby Ringside Gym, accompanied by Anderson, who would take 10% of his earnings when he turned professional and would remain in his corner for the next 7 years. Anderson called Sonny a fight handler's dream, and he was adamant that his character was misinterpreted. Sonny wasn't a bad boy. He was badly misused.
Anderson wasn't the only trainer Sonny used in his earlier career while he lived in St. Louis. He also trained in Johnny Tocco's gym. Now, Johnny Tocco described his massive fists as ham-like hands. He reminisced on the days he spent in this gym, and he said he tore bags up. He could turn that hook, put everything behind it, turn and snap. Bam. I saw him knock out guys with a straight jab. Bam. In the ring, Sonny was a killing machine. In February 1953, Mitchell entered Sonny into the 18th annual St. Louis Golden Gloves at the Kiel Auditorium, and he knocked out Luther Corder in the semi-final and won a unanimous decision against the All-Army champion Lloyd Willis in the final. That victory qualified Sonny for the Midwestern Golden Glove Championships in Chicago, where he stopped Donnie Freeman and then defeated Oklahoma's Carl McClure on points that very same evening. Sonny's next victim was Tulo Lee Mead from Memphis, and he toyed with him before unleashing a burst of left to the head and rights to the body that forced the referee to stop the fight midway through the second round. Now, nearly 10 years later, Mead actually looked back on his defeat saying, "When Liston knocked me down, I made the mistake of getting up." Next up for Liston was Ben Bankhead of Kansas City in the semi-finals, and Sonny marched on with a points decision. In the final, he met the 6'4" Olympic champion from LA, Ed Saunders, and Mitchell recalled that Sonny was scared to death, but he beat the hell out of him. His second Golden Gloves title earned Sonny a place in the National Amateur Athletic Union Championships in Boston, but before that he added the Ozark AAU title without even throwing a punch.
Well, if the boxing community didn't already know by now who Sonny Liston was, they certainly would do after he recovered from a first round knockdown of sorts, where he sort of staggered around and then it was a bit of a flash knockdown, to go on and beat the highly rated New Yorker Julius the Hammer Griffin and win the Golden Gloves national heavyweight title at the Chicago Stadium on March 1953. Now, word had spread like wildfire about this heavyweight hitter who was marching his way to the program without barely breaking sweat. That was until 1 month later in Boston, when he was knocked out by Detroit's Lou Graff within a minute of the start of round 2, and then went on to lose again to Philadelphian Jim McCarter on points. Sonny put those defeats behind him quickly and impressed when he represented the United States in an international Golden Gloves tournament against West Europe. Sonny's first round stoppage over a West German southpaw, Hermann Schilberger, drew the Americans level at 5-5 and was even heard whistling during the fight by some at ringside. So he's sort of smashing up this West German and whistling away in the ring. Sonny Liston's amateur career was brief but successful. Just before turning professional, he gained valuable experience when he sparred with Nino Valdez from Cuba. It has been said that Sonny took a solid right, which put him down, and then he bounced back with a flurry of blows to the body that forced Valdez to withdraw from the workout. So proving straight away he can hold his own against top established professionals. The inevitable turn to professional ranks came when he signed a 2-year contract with Mitchell and Harrison, with a 2-year renewable option. Unfortunately, although the managers had agreed to pay him $35 a week when he wasn't fighting or had no job, it would not be long before they claimed they could not afford to maintain their commitments. But before the contractual agreements began to be diced up, which is something that happens to Sonny, Sonny made his pro debut on September 2nd, 1953 at the St. Louis Arena in a scheduled 4-rounder against Don Smith.
Now, Liston kick-started his pro career in formidable fashion with a knockout in just 33 seconds with what Mitchell insisted was his very first punch. At the same venue 15 days later, he decisioned another local lad, Ponce de Leon, in 4 rounds. It was at this point, according to Mitchell, that Sonny's contractual arrangements moved into the grasps of some, as he lightly put it, questionable character. Mitchell's associate and St. Louis mobster, John Vitale, ended up taking approximately 12% of Sonny's contract and would continue to do so until the end of his boxing career. Well, that weasel, Mitchell, had sold a portion of Sonny's contract and continued to work as his manager, but did sort of accept responsibility for placing him in the hands of the mob, and he said, "I'm no associate of Vitale. I know him just as everybody else in St. Louis knows him. I met him on a golf course in a foursome, not by invitation. He was introduced to me. I, of all people, couldn't afford to discriminate. I learned that he was interested in boxing and boxers, and I told him about Sonny and my hardships. Vitale said that he'd give Sonny and another of my fighters, Jesse Bowdry, jobs at his concrete manufacturing company at $65 a week. This was good money. This was my association with Vitale. I don't think I did anything wrong. I had to get him, as in Sonny, out of my pocket." Now, at such an early stage of Sonny Liston's career, he was now what was effectively known as an owned fighter by the mob. During the 1953 edition of The Ring, Nat Fleischer printed a statement on the speculations of mob affiliation with boxers. But let's be real here, everybody knew that the mob ran boxing. And this is what Nat wrote in that 1953 edition of The Ring, and it says, "It has been rumoured that some of our major fighters are owned in part by undesirables, but no proof has ever been submitted. Many of those who were in this field have quit due to the fear of prosecution." And of course, we've done our boxing and the mafia episode for the Darker Side of Boxing podcast, so if you've not heard that, you'll get more of a interlinking into this part of Sonny's career and how it affected Sonny, of course, and the episode on Sonny Liston. There's a lot more detail that we do go into with that there.
We do, and I mean, Sonny at this time, he's young, he's naive, and he wasn't bothered. He never had any idea what he was getting himself into. All he cared about at the time was respect, which they gave him, getting paid and getting fed. And he was even quoted as saying, "Whatever you tell me to do, I'll do." You know, what can you do? It's just a young kid. For those that are not familiar with John Vitale, he was a Sicilian American who had risen from a soldier to the underboss of the St. Louis crime family. Now, his connections are undeniable. For example, Missouri law enforcers confirmed his acquittal rate of 55 from 58 arrests. He was almost untouchable, the guy. He was also the president of the Anthony Novelty Company and oversaw the union's activities in St. Louis. But he was getting some unwanted attention following the death of 2 local union officials in 1952. Vitale, of course, was the main suspect, but of course, due to lack of hard evidence, he was never charged. After seeing the size of Sonny, he quickly hired him, primarily to maintain order among the black labourers. So when not in the ring at night or training, his day job was to be a strikebreaker for Vitali, working mainly for the cement local as an employer on site and enforcer who prevented the workers from striking. Sonny said, those guys, they treated me like a man. They thought I was one because I could work as hard and as long as they could, and I could do more than hold my own in a fight. It was a tough bunch. Many of them had been in jail and others were headed there, but they were the only friends I had, and they influenced what I did and thought. I never knew there were other kinds of people. I'd heard of Negro doctors and lawyers and outstanding businessmen, of course, but how was I going to get with them? They were educated, refined people. I wasn't educated. I knew I wasn't refined.
Back to the ring, and Sonny earned a 6-round points verdict over Benny Thomas on November 21st, 1953, then started the new year in January with a 6-round knockout of Martin Lee under the St. Louis Arena lights. Stan Howlett was the 5th straight victim of Sonny Liston in St. Louis on points before he headed out of town to Detroit for the first time against the highly rated Johnny Summerlin during the summer. Sonny went the full 8 rounds for the first time in his career, and he won via a unanimous decision. Although it was not plain sailing, the fight was made by Frank Mitchell, and he reflected on some sloppy moments by saying he, as in Sonny, got a little careless and got hit real good. But he took all Summerlin could give him. After his 6th victory, the ring named Sonny Liston its heavyweight prospect of the month. Then in August, Liston and Summerlin tangoed again in a rematch, and again Sonny got the nod from the Detroit officials. 2 months later, and Sonny was matched with Marty Marshall, but instead of landing the knockout blow when he had his opponent in danger after 2 rounds, Sonny pulled back, admitting, I was told to take it easy for a couple of rounds. Marshall's a clown, they told me, who'd bounce around and flick punches from all sides. I was standing there, kinda wondering, when all of a sudden he lets out a yell, and with my mouth wide open, gaping, he slugged me right on the jaw. It didn't hurt, but I couldn't close my mouth. I had to fight the last 6 rounds with my mouth open. After a while, it hurt real bad. Of course, Sonny Liston's jaw was broken, but unaware of the extent of his injury, he fought on and he lost his first professional fight on points. When he returned to St. Louis, his jaw was wired shut, which put him out of action for 6 months.
While in recovery, though, Sonny's criminal past was leaked, which did not help his popularity, nor Mitchell's ability to sell his fighter. He recalled, that stigma, it was all on me. I needed some help. So he bought out Harrison. So this is Mitchell's. He bought out Harrison for $600, and he sold his share onto a local drugstore owner, Eddie Yultz. Now, Sonny's comeback began with a points victory over 8 rounds at the St. Louis Arena the following March in 1955 against Neil Welch. The following month saw a rematch with Marshall, this time on home turf, and it turned into a revenge mission for Liston, who won via a 6th round knockout. Marshall actually recalled flooring Liston in their second fight, and he said, I remember every little thing about it. I wish it had never happened. It was the 4th round. He came in with that left of his, and I crossed over with my right to his jaw, and he went down. I don't know whether he was down for an 8 count because he needed it or because the rules required it, but he was down. Tony Anderson, obviously in Sonny's corner, he disagreed, and he said Marshall landed a punch on Liston's glove, and Liston had his feet so tied up he fell. The referee started the count. I told him it wasn't a knockdown. Marshall will never forget the finish, though. I've got 2 parts of me that remember Sonny Liston. That ear he hit in the 5th, and my stomach. He hit me in the stomach with a left hand in the 6th. That wasn't a knockdown either. It couldn't be. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. Then on to Pittsburgh on May 5th, 1955. Sonny knocked out Emil Burko in the 5th round. Less than 3 weeks later, he stopped Calvin Butler in Indianapolis on September the 13th. Johnny Gray was stopped in 6, and Larry Watson lasted into the 4th in East St. Louis on December the 13th.
The rubber match with Marshall took place on March 6, 1956 in Pittsburgh, and Sonny had his rival on the verge of a knockout on several occasions, but he couldn't find the finishing punch. Instead, he went on to win via points over 10 rounds. Sonny went 14-1 with 7 knockouts after this victory. But his career was abruptly halted 2 months later due to an incident on May the 5th, 1956, when Sonny and Geraldine attended a party thrown by some friends on North Taylor Avenue in St. Louis. Now, accounts of what transpired vary, but they all end up with the same outcome. Sonny was charged with beating up a police officer and leaving him unconscious behind 2818 North Taylor Avenue. The law enforcer in question was hospitalised with a smashed knee and a gash over his left eye. Patrolman Thomas Mello said this. He said, "I was making my relief corner and passed an alley. A cab was parked in it with parking lights on. From the entrance to the alley, I asked who the driver was. The driver came down and said his name was Patterson. I told him he could get a ticket, but I was going to let him move the cab. Then Liston came down. You can't give him no ticket," he said. Real rough like. "The hell I can't," I said. I took out my ticket book and flashlight to get the city sticker number off the cab. As I started over, Liston came over and gave me a bear hug from the front, lifting me clear off the ground. Mello then allegedly said that he was dragged to the rear of the alley and Sonny grabbed his gun and Patterson told Sonny to shoot the white son of a bitch.
Then Mello continued with his story and he said that Liston releases me and points the gun at my head. I'm pushing up on the barrel with both hands to keep from looking down the muzzle. They were walking all over me. I hollered, "Don't shoot me." Liston let up and then he hit me over the eye with either his fists or the gun. Then they ran up the alley. Mello, according to the official police report, was found lying in the alley, badly beaten with his uniform torn, his badge ripped off and his revolver missing. Sonny, well, he gave a different version of events and he said that I saw the cab pull into the alleyway and I hurried out of the house. Meanwhile, a cop come up and told the cabbie he was going to give him a ticket. I said, "How come you going to give the cab a ticket? He's just doing his business." The cop turns to me, "You're a smart M-word." And then I say, "I'm not smart." He reaches for his gun and tries to take it out of the holster, but I take it away from him. Later, the cop said I was drunk. Now, how could a drunk handle a sober cop trained to make arrests to pull his gun? Frank Mitchell, well, obviously he pleaded with the authorities for leniency after hearing Sonny's side of the story, claiming that Sonny told me that the cops called him a black son of a bitch. He said the cop said, "Take care of your own business or I'll lock you up." The truth of the matter is the policeman had been drinking, not Sonny. When the cop called him his name, or this name, Sonny just grabbed him, hugged him, took the pistol away from him, and the cop fell, hit his leg, and he broke it. He'd been in hospital before as well. Sonny got excited, not knowing what to do. He ran and went to his sister.
Although Patterson denied any involvement, the police provoked a statement from the cabbie saying that he had waited at the entrance to the alley and then drove Sonny to 15th Street where his sister lived. At one point in the journey, Patterson recalled Sonny showed him a .38 revolver and told him that he had taken it from Mello. The gun was recovered on 15th Street and Sonny was finally caught by police a couple of nights later. The arresting officer was African-American James Reddick, who was responsible for stopping his police colleagues from shooting Liston dead. A black man beating up a police officer and breaking his leg didn't go down well, and many white officers wanted to shoot him down, but thankfully Reddick was able to intervene and convince Sonny to hand himself in, where he was imprisoned for 9 months. Sonny was back in the nick, but this time for only 7 months, which I think is incredible considering what he was actually charged for, which was assault to kill. A certain John Vitale and his close associates Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo proved what being affiliated to the mob can do. Now, we will be bringing in the star of boxing, Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo, into Sonny Liston's career profile very soon. When Sonny was released, he was handed a suspension from boxing by the Missouri State Athletic Commissioner Charles W. Pean and was arrested 4 times in 1957 while awaiting his December trial date. On June the 14th, he was pulled up for speeding. A week later, he was picked up as a suspected thief and released. Then on August the 14th, he was detained for failing to answer the speeding summons. And then on October the 14th, he was again suspected of being a thief, again without sufficient grounds. It kind of felt like he was possibly being targeted, maybe.
I think so. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the fact that he's only got 7 months from that charge of assault to kill is incredible. I mean, the police officer, by the sounds of it, is a racist piece of shit, and Sonny lost it. So it's just what happened. I think it's pretty evident from what we've read there. But Pete Hamill of the New York Post actually observed Sonny's persistent police harassment. He said a pattern was beginning. The St. Louis police force apparently had declared war on Sonny Liston. One officer even actually admitted in a report that we wanted to break up Liston's associations with hoodlums. Every time we could jump Sonny up, find him, we did. So there you go. Sonny knew what was going on, and he said that there was nothing they didn't pick me up for. If I went into a store and asked for a stick of gum, they'd say it was a stick up. So, everyone knew it was just bad time, really. He could have been in prison for a long time, to be fair, but instead he's being harassed. Eventually, Charles W. Pean agreed to renew Sonny's boxing license, stating that after a series of arrests, Liston came to me and asked for another chance. I talked to Captain Doherty, who was then head of the hoodlum squad, and to several sports writers as well, and they agreed. Well, Sonny restarted his boxing career again on January 29, 1958. But whenever he fought at the St. Louis Arena, plainclothes police officers were deployed throughout the venue to keep tabs on the many mobsters in attendance. They would usher out those that came in from another state to clean up their streets. And the knock-on effect, of course, was that fights were few and far between because no one wanted to attend St. Louis anymore. Sonny, well, he re-emerged with 2 knockouts, not in St. Louis, in Chicago, against Bill Hunter, who was the first victim inside 2 rounds, and then Ben Wise in 4 rounds on March 11. That same evening, Sonny signed a 5-year contract with Blinky Palermo. The deal had been actually pre-arranged a year before when Frank Mitchell, John Vitale, and Sonny drove to Chicago for the Sugar Ray Robinson versus Gene Fullmer fight. Mitchell told Blinky that Sonny would be the next heavyweight champion. Blinky advised Mitchell that although he could not possibly take over the managerial reins himself, he could get somebody to help.
Now, Blinky Palermo identified Joseph Pep Barone, who was a Philadelphia matchmaker who also operated the Pep Athletic Club in Allentown. Now, Barone, Mitchell and Vitale reunited sometime after in Chicago when Barone informed Mitchell that he was taking over as the manager of Record and would bring Sonny back to Philly with him. Barone operated a 24% stake in Sonny's future, Vitale and Palermo 12% apiece, and Frankie Carbo 52%. For those that are not aware, here is a summary of who Frankie Carbo and Frank Blinky Palermo were. Starting with Blinky, he was actually an associate of the Philadelphia crime family, and he ran the largest numbers racket in that city. Palermo either owned outright or under the table several high-profile professional fighters before acquiring Sonny Liston. He was known for cheating members of his stable, their trainers and or managers, out of their share of the purses, and if they protested, he would use force in the only way mobsters use force. Now, Carbo, he was part of the Lachetti crime family, one of the 5 New York mafia families. He operated as a gunman with Murder Incorporated before transitioning into one of the most powerful promoters in professional boxing. He led a group known as the Combination, and together they were highly successful in fixing high-profile boxing matches. Carbo was a deadly hitman during his time in Murder Inc., and it's even been claimed that he was responsible for murdering Benjamin Bugsy Siegel in Beverly Hills in California 1947 at the order of Mayor Lansky. Now, this deadly duo were the most powerful mob figures in boxing at this time. Even with all their power, they couldn't plan a clear path to the world heavyweight title for the newest protege, because of a certain man that we've already done a career profile on, in D'Amato, who actually refused to surrender to their demands.
Now, we have spoken at length about Cass and his handle on the heavyweight title with Floyd Patterson, and his hatred towards the mob and the international boxing, especially President Jim Norris. Now, please do check out our Cass D'Amato career profile on his endeavours, on how he feared for his life and publicly shamed key figures, resulting in his own downfall. Now, moving on, and Tom Tannis, a manager of Ezard Charles, who had a share of Sonny as well for a brief while. So you got another guy coming in. He actually wrote a letter to Nat Fleischer about the difficulties in getting fights for Sonny around the country. Liston can fight like hell, and those in boxing know it. That is one of the principal reasons he can't get fights. He's too good. No one wants any part of him these days. Now, a supposedly well thought of Chicago businessman who Mitchell preferred to keep anonymous came into the picture, confident that he would be able to get some fights here for Sonny. A week after Sonny stopped Hunter, he apparently signed a 3-year contract whereby he would be entitled to 50% of all future purses, with Mitchell and this Chicagoan sharing the other half and paying all expenses incurred. Attorney was responsible for drawing up that contract and insisted that it was completely legal, completely above board. But when Mitchell and his unidentified acquaintance met to discuss Sonny's future further, Mitchell backtracked, saying that he played no part in the new arrangement because, in his own words, some of the boys in the fight mob came up to me one night and said they're taking Sonny East. Mitchell explained in the Kiefer hearings in 1960 that the parting was amicable, and he recalled, I asked Sonny, is this okay? Sonny said, yes, I want to leave St. Louis. The police are bothering me.
Mitchell was now effectively being frozen out, but not completely, while Sonny relocated to Philadelphia and away from the St. Louis police. Some have suggested that Sonny was forced to leave the state, but whatever the reason, there is no doubt that the St. Louis authorities did not like his mob connections. He moved into an apartment in the Hamilton Court Hotel in Philadelphia, where Palermo owned a restaurant. Sonny's rent, food, clothing, and the use of a car were provided at Palermo's expense. There was proof of this in the form of a $300 restaurant receipt and a hotel bill, both Sonny's in Blinky's briefcase when he was arrested in June of 1959 while he was watching Virgil Akins at the St. Louis Arena. Although relocated in Philly, Sonny returned to the ring in Chicago on March the 11th, 1958 to knock out Ben Wise in 4 rounds. And then he outpointed Burt Whitehurst over 10 rounds in St. Louis the following month. He then travelled back to Chicago and knocked out Julio Medeiros in 3, while Mitchell and Barone stayed in the background. Medeiros confirmed the power of Liston when he said afterwards, he hurt me with his jab. Sonny was back in Chicago for a nationally televised fight on August 6 against Wayne Beather, who was supposed to provide Sonny with his first real acid test. But it was over in precisely 56 seconds, and Beather lost 7 of his teeth. Now, that victory caused a ripple in Philadelphia that threw Sonny into the wider public domain. So much so that Truman Gibson of the IBC said he would offer Floyd Patterson $250,000 to fight Sonny. D'Amato was not interested in working with Norris and Gibson, who were the puppets of the mob, but it did start to raise suspicion that Cuss was protecting Patterson, something that would continue for a few more years yet.
Sonny just had to go about his business and keep winning in hope that public pressure would force a world title fight. He continued his ferocious onslaught on the heavyweight division in Miami Beach on October 7 against Frankie Daniels on a card that was promoted by Angelo Dundee's brother Chris. The Associated Press, for the first time, we're going to do an Associated Press right up here. They wrote on this fight, and it said Sonny Liston of Philadelphia knocked out Frankie Daniels of Los Angeles in 2 minutes and 22 seconds of the first round Tuesday night. The KO was Liston's 5th in 6 fights this year. After staggering Daniels with a left hook, Liston put him away with 2 overhand rights. Less than 3 weeks later, Sonny fought for the last time in St. Louis. It was a rematch with Burt Whitehouse, and it was promoted by the IBC. The Baltimore fighter was knocked through the ropes in the final seconds of the fight, en route to a points decision, and this is what the Associated reported. In a wild flurry of lefts and rights, Sonny sent Whitehurst reeling through the ropes. Whitehurst lay on the apron as referee Harry Kessler began He was trying to get back in the ring when the final gong sounded at the count of 8. Sonny's 8th and final bout of 1958 saw him return to Miami Beach on November 18 against Ernie Cabb. The fight went 7 rounds until the bout was stopped by the ring doctor between rounds due to Cabb receiving a cut over his left eye and nose. 3 successful appearances during 1958 on national television were enough to secure a number 7 rating in the Ring's end-of-year poll. Jumping to 1959, and that began with a fight against Big Mike DeJong. He was 36-5-1, but if you ever needed proof that Sonny struggled to get fights, his purse for this fight was $4,000. Now, you got to remember that DeJong is a name I can't even say properly, and he's nowhere near as big as a name as what Sonny Liston goes on. He got $12,000.
Now on to the fight and the aftermath. This was what the United Press printed about it, and they said Liston floored DeJong twice with solar plexus punches for a technical knockout in the 6th round of their TV fight. After referee Jimmy Peerless had stopped the bout in the 6th round before the 3,858 at the Miami Beach exhibition hall, the fight was almost resumed in DeJong's corner when the victorious Philadelphian danced across the ring to shake hands with the vanquished Mike. DeJong refused to shake and angrily accused Sonny of uppercutting him when down on one knee the second time. Mike called Sonny a name. Liston swung at him and missed. Then their handlers separated them. Now after the heated exchange, Rocky Marciano cast his opinion on Sonny's performance while sitting ringside, and he said, "His left jab is the best of any fighter I've seen since Joe Louis. This fellow gets real force into his jab like Joe used to do. He's great. Just great." The Rock then went on to say, "I'd rank Liston number 2 right behind the Swede, Ingemar Johansson." Sonny called out his preferred next opponents, and he said, "I want Eddie Machen, Zora Foley or Nino Valdez for my next fight." Pet Baroni also called for bigger names, and he said, "Now we only want rated fighters. We want to fight the best, and we feel public opinion will force a match with whoever is champion after Floyd Patterson fights Ingemar Johansson." Now 2 months later, and Miami played host for another Sonny Liston fight against another hard hitter who also had difficulty finding opponents, and that was Cleveland Williams, who was 45-2. Now as suspected, this fight never lasted very long, just 2 rounds in the end, but it was Williams who started faster. Sonny was not happy with Williams after the first, and he said, "He treated me rudely in the first round." An upset Sonny went on to stop Williams in the 3rd.
Brilliant. He treated me rudely, so I'm going to knock you out next round. Fantastic. By the summer, Johansson was the heavyweight champion after defeating Patterson, while Carbo, Palermo, Gibson and co. had all been rounded up by the FBI for investigations into their hold on boxing. Sonny was granted his wish of fighting Nino Valdez when he locked horns in the Chicago Stadium on August 6, 1959. Now, here's Milwaukee's Centennial's take on how the fight went. Sonny Liston, his right eye clamped tight after the first round, exploded with a ferocious punching onslaught to flatten the veteran Cuban Nino Valdez in 47 seconds of the 3rd round. A tremendous left hook, followed by a whistling right, dumped the trial horse against the ropes shortly after the third open. Valdez sat there, one arm draped over the ropes until 7, then rolled to his knees where he took the full 10 count. The year ended with a stoppage over Willie Bezmanoff in Cleveland on December 9. The German failed to answer the bell for the 7th after absorbing a barrage of punches in the 6th and was actually bleeding from several bad gashes over his eyes. While Sonny continued to march on, and he was marching on to a world title shot, Floyd Patterson's manager and trainer, Cus D'Amato, was stripped of his licenses as manager and second within the jurisdiction of the New York State Athletic Commission after getting caught by the blindside. Now, his obsession with the IBC and overprotection of Patterson left Cus suspended. Again, check out our career profile for more details. Sonny was not having things his own way either. While not long after arriving in Philadelphia, he landed himself into a spot of bother with the law once again. Patrolman David E. Knox reported finding Sonny grappling with John Polite. Knox stated that when he questioned the pair, they become loud and unruly. Sonny claimed that he had been hit from behind from an unknown assailant. There was no arrest, but word spread among the local police that he had beaten up a fellow police officer, and that is also the same story where apparently he picked a police officer up and chucked him in a dustbin.
Now, as in St. Louis, from this moment forward, Sonny would be harassed at every turn. Every squad car across the city had taped a photo of Sonny to their sun visors. He was officially a marked man. If it wasn't the Philadelphia police that began their assault on Sonny, it was the newspapers, who often pointed out his criminal past and connections to the mob. Even with all this negative press, Sonny was still elevated to the top of the ring's fan poll as the #1 contender to the heavyweight crown. Some feared that he'd be frozen out like the legendary fighters, like Harry Wills and Sam Langford. Not to be deterred by a good active year in the ring, problems began creeping in outside. Sonny returned to Miami on February the 23rd, 1960, and he gained a 6th successive knockout victory at the expense of Howard King. The Associated Press wrote, "A right to the midsection just as the bell sounded, ending the 7th round floored King. King was examined by a physician between rounds and ruled unfit to continue." 4 weeks later, in Houston, Texas, and Sonny made lighter work of Cleveland Williams than he did in their first encounter. In front of a crowd of 10,000, Williams was put down twice and stopped in the 2nd round when he was looking worse for wear in his corner. Sonny was the #1 contender to the heavyweight crown. But he was not under any illusions with his ranking, telling reporters, "I could be #1 for a long time." Many speak of Sonny and his generosity to those less fortunate than him. A great example of this was when he hired Willie Reddish, a 43-year-old ex-heavyweight from Philly. The truck driver who trained young kids for the Police Athletic League was approached by Sonny and offered to train him, which he accepted.
Then on April 25th in Houston, Texas, Sonny pummeled Roy Harris to the canvas 3 times in the first round for an automatic TKO under NBA rules. Then told the world watching on closed circuit television, "I want a shot at the title next, but if I can't get it, I'll fight anybody that gets in my way." The 2 next opponents that stood in Sonny's way were arguably 2 of the best heavyweights to never win a world title. First up was the slick and skillful Zora Foley, who was 51-3-2 at the time, and that fight took place at the Coliseum in Denver on July 18, with many betting men and critics of Sonny Liston's, that is, favouring the boxer ahead of the slugger. Foley took the larger share of the purse, a guaranteed $40,000, and Liston $25,000, accepting the smaller fee to just make the fight. It was a gamble that paid off. Sonny floored Foley twice in the 2nd round before setting up the polished boxer with a right cross and a fabulous left hook to end proceedings in the 3rd. 3 rounds it took him to get rid of Foley. Impressive. 2 months later, it was the turn of Eddie Machen, who was 34-1 at the Sick's Stadium in Seattle, Washington. Both fighters were guaranteed $25,000 each in front of a crowd of 7,682. The Seattle United Press International rightly described the different styles in this fight. Liston was the prodding aggressor, and Machen played the part of a darting thief. Machen was basically just resorted to stay in the distance and away from Liston, and he did take in the full distance. And in the end, though, obviously the judges favoured Sonny, taking his record to 31-1. So as a points decision for Sonny Liston. And after their fight against Machen, he made an interesting allegation, which has rumbles of a future fight, which we will talk about. He said that Liston's handlers made deliberate use of illegal medication to temporarily blind him during the fight. He theorized that Liston's handlers rubbed medication on their fighter's shoulders, which was transferred to Machen's forehead during clinches and dripping into his eyes. And he said, "I thought my eyes would burn out of my head," and Liston seemed to know it would happen.
Now, while Sonny was in Seattle for the Machen fight, the patrolman Thomas Mello surfaced with a $90,000 lawsuit for damages. Again, we refer to the author Rob Steen, who wrote, 10 days later, it was reported that Sonny had filed a petition with the county clerk, Norman R. Riddell, requesting that, since the parties were residents of different states, the suit be removed from the state court to a federal one. If any settlement ensued, the details were never published. On March the 8th, 1961, Sonny continues his career and he knocked out the late substitute Howard King in their rematch after 8 rounds at the Auditorium in Miami Beach. A couple of weeks later, and Patterson won his rubber match against Ingemar Johansson with a 6-round knockout to retain his world heavyweight crown, also in Miami. Patterson was being pressured now to fight the outright #1 contender, Sonny Liston, but it seemed like the fight everyone wanted was never going to materialise. Sonny now rightly became impatient. He decided to confront Cuss, and he actually walked into his office unexpectedly and asked him why he wouldn't let Patterson fight him. And the answer? You know what you have to do, meaning that Sonny needed to break free of his mob ties. A dejected Sonny told the reporters, "I won't get the chance because of Cuss D'Amato." With strained relations between Patterson and Cuss caused during the Johansson trilogy, Patterson was now cutting him out of the picture, and soon would buckle to the public pressure. The pressure to make the fight did not just lie with Patterson. Sonny also needed to demonstrate to the boxing powers that he must remove himself from his current backers for a fight to be commissioned. In April, Dr. Dan O'Kilroy, the chairman of the California State Athletic Commission, confirmed that Sonny would never be permitted to fight within the state boundaries under his present management.
And Kilroy, well, he declared that, from what we have learned, Joseph Baroni, who is Liston's manager on record or off record, is no manager at all. Liston is managed by underworld figures who are hidden. Sonny has to rid himself of his underworld ties, and I just don't see how Liston can do that without a machine gun. Influenced by Joe Louis, Sonny Liston promptly announced that he was asking Baroni to give up his contract with 2 years still to run, stating, "So I can get a title fight," and disclosed that he would quit boxing if he refused. Later that month, Sonny bought out Baroni's contract, which cost something between $70,000 to $80,000. I think it was initially $150,000, and Baroni turned around and said, "No, you can. It's all right, you can give me half." So he took $75,000 instead. And Sonny told Patterson through the newspapers, "Is my house clean enough now for him to give me a fight, or was he only looking for an excuse to duck me when he told the world he wouldn't fight me until I cleaned my house?" Now needing a new manager, he chose George Katz, who had previously managed a guy called Gil Turner and had no links to the underworld. After a thorough investigation, the last thing to establish was that what links Sonny actually had to the mob and who owned what of Sonny Liston. This information came out during the Kiefer hearings when Frank Mitchell confirmed that he was still receiving 25% of the manager's share from Sonny's purses, despite having supposedly departed the scene 3 years previous. And again, author Rob Steen wrote that Blinky Palermo was named as Sonny's undercover manager and Carbo's right hand, with Truman Gibson acknowledging that a check had been paid to Blinky's services in securing Sonny for the IBC. But interestingly, always a loophole, as you do with the mafia figures, there was nothing wrong with Palermo having a cut of Sonny as an undisclosed manager, because Palermo had been issued a managerial license by Illinois and in Pennsylvania too. Mr. Carbo participated in the Senate subcommittee investigating his links into the boxing world while serving his 2-year sentence on Rikers Island for matchmaking and managing without a license.
Now, during the hearings, Sonny acquitted himself well, and he was questioned repeatedly about his associates, and his testimony summed up his predicament when he said, "A lawyer can get you sent away to jail for 20 years, but he still gets paid. A doctor can kill you, but he still gets paid. Them guys can't lose. If I had to do it all over again, I would never be a fighter." He was even shown a slip of paper with Blinky's telephone number scribbled on it, evidence the police claimed to have found in Sonny's pocket, and his response was priceless. He said, "I don't write." Sonny even found the funny side to being carved up financially by saying, "I'd have to have made $1 million a month to take care of all these people." This left Kiefer to conclude that it would be unconscientiable for his championship aspirations to be thwarted. Sonny must have felt relieved after being subjected to a difficult ordeal during the peak of his boxing career, but things got worse before they got better. He was charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest for a couple of stupid incidents that involved an innocent female civilian. Sonny and a friend pretended to be police officers and shook the lady up, and for turning off his lights so he wouldn't be detected by the police car. The disorderly conduct was dismissed after the lady dropped the charges, but the resisting arrest charge went to court. The Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission decided to suspend his license indefinitely on July the 14th, 1960. A brief typed statement was issued on Sonny's behalf, and it said, "I regret I have caused the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission any embarrassment by reason of my indiscreet behaviour. I can assure the committee that from now on in, I shall so conduct myself as to credibility merit the confidence you have imposed on me by granting me a boxer's license. I place myself in your hands."
And that was definitely not written by Sonny Liston himself. He can't write, and he definitely wouldn't be producing sentences like that. But suspended from boxing and overweight, Sonny was then back in court for his resisting arrest charge on August the 2nd. But Sonny was released on a $500 bail and dismissed. The judge, Victor Blanc, actually believed that the case had been blown out of proportion. After the verdict, Sonny told the press, "It's great, it's great." When asked if he was bothered by all this, Sonny responded, "Why should I be? I didn't do anything wrong. No crime was committed. Just like my manager said, it was a mistake." But without a license, Sonny decided to get back to training, get himself back into fighting shape, keep his head down and away from the newspapers. Now, while biding his time, Geraldine would actually read the reports to him, and the newspaper reports, that is, and they all continue to paint a picture of Liston as a menace and ties, obviously, to the organised crime, which made him unworthy of a shot at the heavyweight title against the clean and fan favourite of sorts, Floyd Patterson. And the National Association of the Advancement of Coloured People, or the NAACP, were actually starting to build momentum at this time, and they wanted law-abiding citizens to represent the heavyweight championship and black role models to be more like Floyd Patterson. They did not want Patterson to fight Sonny Liston because they did not want him to be a symbol of their campaign. And Percy Sutton, the president of the body's Manhattan branch, actually said, "Hell, let's stop kidding. I'm for Patterson because he represents us better than Liston ever could or would." Now, during the Kiefer hearings, Sonny confided in Father Stevens, and they actually rekindled their relationship or their friendship. His influence must have directed him or directed Sonny to Father Murphy, a priest he had met while fighting in Denver, and while training through suspension, he actually spent much of his time with him and Reverend William Wade, and spiritual guidance, and Geraldine, obviously his rock of a wife, helped Sonny get through his troubled times.
Alcohol was also becoming a problem for Sonny. Father Thomas Kelly, a close friend of Father Murphy, said Murph tried to get him to stop drinking. That was his biggest problem. You could smell him in the mornings. Oh, poor Sonny. He was just an accident waiting to happen. Murph used to say, "Pray for the poor bastard." Well, Sonny was beginning to pull himself together and out of his 4-month hole, and he told a reporter, "The newspapers always put me down as a bad guy. You can't live it down. They always bring it up. When I got in the last trouble, they had big headlines. When I was cleared, they had this much." And he indicated the amount by cocking his hand and bringing together his thumb and forefinger until they almost touched. Whatever there was is over. But will people believe it? Will they believe me? Now, a fight with Henry Cooper in England was actually discussed for Sonny Liston, but nothing more ever came of it. According to Jim Wicks, Henry's manager, "We don't want to meet this geezer Liston walking down the street, let alone in the ring." But finally, almost 9 months since he defeated Howard King, Sonny fought in front of a Philadelphia crowd in December of 1961 and made short work of Albert Westfall, knocking him out in 2 minutes with a left jab right hand combination. On the same night in Toronto, Canada, Patterson knocked out Tom McNeely in 4 rounds. Afterwards, Cus D'Amato was asked about a defence against Sonny Liston. He surprisingly referred to his mob connections, and he said, "Liston knows what he must do to get a fight with Patterson. If he does it, he knows he can sign for the fight tomorrow."
Well, to many, I mean, his statement actually made no sense whatsoever, because Frankie Carbo, by this point, had been sentenced to 25 years in Alcatraz after being convicted of conspiracy and extortion, and Palermo was on his way to join him, not in Alcatraz, but in prison. Patterson's response was a little more forthcoming. "I would definitely give Liston a chance. There are no obstacles to me, but my manager says they are pretty serious ones." Early in January of 1962, Patterson met with President John Kennedy at the White House, and it was rumoured that he, as in JF Kennedy, urged Patterson to find an opponent with a better character. Others suggest that Patterson was asked by the president who his next opponent was going to be, and he said Liston, which meant that he couldn't go back on his word. Sonny was convinced of this, and convinced that that incident and him telling JFK was the reason why Patterson was finally persuaded to take the fight. And he said, "Frankly, I don't think Patterson would have fought if he hadn't promised the president." On the contrary, Patterson said this was not the case at all. "There was no truth in that at all. The president simply asked me who my next fight was going to be against, and I said, between you and I, Liston." Just under 2 years later, and JFK would be assassinated. I'm sure everyone knows who JFK was, and the fight Sonny Liston had been waiting for, had almost been confirmed for the spring at the Yankee Stadium. But after much debate, the New York State Athletic Commission once again refused to approve Sonny of a boxing license. It's the same commission that said they took it back, revoked it for a lifetime, for indefinitely. While waiting to get his license approved, Palermo was sent to prison in Lewisburg Penitentiary, Pennsylvania, and he handed over his duties to another frontman, Sam Margolis. Now, his partner in a Philly restaurant, that's who he was, and Margolis actually introduced Sonny to the Nylon brothers, Robert, James, and Jack. Sonny then entered into another agreement with Robert and James, whereby they formed the Intercontinental Promotions Incorporated.
The deal involved Sonny taking 50% of the stock and fighting exclusively for the corporation, but not his world title fight. That promotion was agreed by Patterson as part of the contract, but we'll come to that in a minute. Now, on December the 16th, 1961, Sonny transferred 275 of his 500 shares to Margolis, who in turn deposited 50 of them with his lawyer. it is more than likely that the other 225 ended up in the hands of Cabo and Palermo while serving their prison sentences. With Sonny finally destined to obtain a boxing licence, a date and venue was agreed for September the 25th, 1962, at the Comiskey Park. The irony of all that had gone before with Sonny and his connections, yet Chicago was chosen, the Windy City, with a deep history involving the most famous underworld figure in Al Capone, and where the Chicago White Sox baseball team play their home games. This, we feel, was the birth of the Mafia's involvement in boxing, and again we refer to the Boxing and the Mafia episode for the darker side of boxing if you do want more details. The negotiations were agreed, but Sonny still lost out. The correct split should have been 40-20 for the champion and 40 for the promoters, but the deal was Patterson to receive 55% of the ancillary proceeds plus 45% of the gate. Sonny would get that 12.5 deal after all, plus a $200,000 guarantee, while Championship Sports Incorporated, known as CSI, would line their pockets with 42.5% of the live gate and 32.5% of the ancillary rights. The contract also had a rematch clause, which would have to take place by September the 30th, 1963 at the latest. If Sonny won, he would collect 30% of both the gate and the ancillary rights in the return.
A lot of hype surrounded around the good versus the bad side of things, and Gay Talese calling Floyd Patterson the greatest black hope of the Urban League. Sonny did not seem bothered by his label, telling prominent African American sports writer Doc Young, "I'm the bad guy, okay. Peoples want to think that, let them. Only bad guys are supposed to lose. I can change that. I'll win." Patterson took a set of fake whiskers and mustache with him to the fight. It just shows you the mindset of Patterson. This was to enable him to make a swift, anonymous exit in the event of defeat. I think that is pretty clear what his shouldn't be thinking of getting defeated before even stepping into the ring. Despite being a champion, Patterson entered as the 5-8 betting underdog. The fight was actually shown on closed circuit TV in 264 locations in the United States and Canada in front of a crowd of 18,894, producing a gross gate of just over $500,000 and a net of just over $500,000, $1 million just over for the whole fight in all. Into the fight, and it was over before it even began. About halfway through the first round, Liston hurt Patterson with a right uppercut and then followed with a series of punches, ending with a left hook that dropped Patterson. He made it to his feet, but was unable to beat the referee's count of 10. And Gilbert Rogan of Sports Illustrated wrote, "Liston is not notably swift and flashy hitter, but that final left hook crashed into Patterson's cheek like a diesel rig going downhill, no brakes. There were no fighters extent and precious few mammals of any variety that could have beaten the count. The miracle is that Patterson was able to get to his knees." The fight lasted just 2 minutes and 6 seconds, making it the third shortest heavyweight title fight on record behind Tommy Burns' 88-second knockout of Jim Roach in 1908 and Joe Lewis's 124-second annihilation of Max Smelling in 1938.
Floyd Patterson congratulated Sonny following defeat, and he said, "I think Sonny has inner qualities that are good. I think the public should give him a chance." Before putting on his disguise of stage whiskers and beard and drove back to New York. Now, Sonny was in disbelief that the fight had ended so quickly, but also gave praise to his opponent and said, "Floyd is a heck of a man. He told me that if the public lets bygones be bygones, he was sure I would prove to be a good champion." Sonny was eager to be the champion the public wanted, and he said, "I want to prove to the public that I can be a good and decent champion." Desperate for acceptance, he later muttered similar words to a reporter the next day, and he said, "If the public allows me the chance to let bygones be bygones, I'll be a worthy champ. If they'll accept me, I'll prove it to them." On his return to Philadelphia, Liston was planning a speech on the plane to address his new adoring fans, assuming that he would receive a hero's welcome. Unfortunately, nobody but paid press came to greet the new heavyweight champ. He was devastated. He thought that becoming the heavyweight champion of the world would make a significant impact and it would change the public's perception of him. He was wrong. The truth was, the best night of his boxing career became one of his saddest. His decisions from this point on were made without any care of what people might think of him. If they see him as a baddie, then he will act like one, because public opinion would never change, no matter what he achieved. The final straw that broke the camel's back was when he was picked up by police for driving suspiciously slowly. It was after that routine check that Liston said, "I would rather be a lamppost in Denver than the mayor of Philadelphia." You've just got to feel sorry for the big guy at this point. We've said this before, how he wanted to be better, he wanted to do the right thing, but it's at this moment, this pivotal moment in his career, in his life, where I think, and I always am adamant, that things changed for him.
Absolutely, it's awful when you can. There's so many documentaries and other books out there. You can actually get an in-depth moment where Sonny Liston's just sort of on the aeroplane, coming out of all these ideas with his nice speech he's writing, and literally just paid press there. Absolutely devastated. I feel sorry for him, man. With that embarrassment, Mr. and Mrs. Liston packed up their bags and they left Philadelphia for Denver in early 1963 for a new, brighter start. The new location changed nothing. Ray Schoeninger, a former sparring partner, he was pulled over in his white Cadillac daily at one point, and he said they must have stopped him 100 times outside City Park. He'd run on the golf course, and as he left his car, they'd stop him. 25 days in a row. Same two cops. They thought it was a big joke. It made me ashamed of being a Denver native. Sad they never left him in peace. While waiting for the second Patterson fight to be scheduled, Sonny travelled to California, and during his visit, he walked into the Beverly Hills Rodeo Hotel in Hollywood and sat down at a table with Mo Dalitz, one-time bootlegger and boss of the Cleveland Mob, now in charge of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas. Now, while having a discussion, Sonny actually clenched his fist and cocked it. Dalitz was insulted by the gesture and told Sonny, "If you hit me, you'd better kill me, because if you don't, I'll make one telephone call and you'll be dead in 24 hours. Taken aback and completely aware of how dangerous it would be to piss off Dalitz, Sonny left the table. Sonny's rematch, back to the possibility of this rematch happening, and when it was going to happen, the rematch was initially Miami in April, but the fight was postponed due to a rumor has it that Sonny actually injured his knee while trying to teach youngsters how to drive a golf ball. Sonny actually retreated to the Thunderball Hotel in Las Vegas when unexpectedly a certain Cassius Clay at the time, aka Muhammad Ali, showed up.
While Sonny shot craps on an adjacent table, Harold Conrad, a boxing promoter and scriptwriter, witnessed what played out next, and he said Liston was a mean-tempered son of a bitch, and he was losing, so naturally he's mad. "Look at that big ugly bear, he can't even shoot craps," quipped Clay. Splinter in the silence, Sonny glared back, grabbed the dice, and rolled again. "Look at that big ugly bear," digged Clay once again. "He can't do nothing right. Come on, big ugly bear, let's get it on. Come on, I'll whip you right now. Floyd Patterson was a nobody, let's get it on. Come on, I'll whip you right now. You'll knock out Floyd Patterson, but I'm the real champ. I'm too fast for you, and you know it. Put up all your money, Sonny, if you think you can whip me." And then Clay walked over to Sonny to address him more directly. "I want you out of town by sunup tomorrow. Las Vegas ain't big enough for the both of us." Now, there are different stories about this altercation, as is the way with boxing folklore, but the one according to Conrad, Sonny hurls down the dice and gets up and says to Clay, "Listen, you faggot, if you don't get out of here in 10 seconds, I'm going to pull that big tongue out of your mouth and stick it up your ass." Others suggest that Sonny slapped Clay in the mouth. Conrad disagrees with that version and he said, I was there. He, as in Sonny, didn't slap him, but he scared the shit out of him, and you better believe it. He remembers asking Ali, were you scared? And he replied, yeah, man, that big ugly bear scared me bad.
Well, Ali, I mean, he has a different version. He said this Liston did, Sonny did, once he got into his face. He said suddenly he reached in his pocket and pulled out a long black pistol. Pointed it straight at my head, pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, I ducked. A chill went through my spine. Bang, bang. He was still aiming at me. I leaped over the blackjack table, then the dice table, scattering chips and cards all over the floor and ducking and dodging all the way out of to the streets, and behind me, the pistol. Bang, bang. Billy Reddish added to this story by claiming that he actually suspected that Clay would pull a stunt, so he actually gave Sonny a gun loaded with blanks. So, I mean, it's possible. Could have been true. Whatever the story you want to believe, it doesn't really matter. Ali continued to pursue Sonny Liston from this point forward, talking his way into a world title fight. Ali even drove to Sonny's home in Denver, tooting his van horn and shouting for Liston to come out of his ass and face him now. A month before Liston fought Patterson in their rematch, the young brash heavyweight from Louisville travelled to London to take on R. Henry Cooper. And after getting floored in the fourth round, he recovered to stop Cooper in the next round on cuts, the round he predicted before the fight. Ali said, I'm not the greatest, I'm the double greatest. Not only do I knock him out, I pick the round. I'm the boldest and the prettiest, the most superior, the most scientific, most skillfulest fighter in the ring today. Now, while Ali might have been on the cusp of a world title shot, the rematch for the world title was postponed yet again and rescheduled from June to July after Patterson had to have a benign tumour in his fourth and fifth knuckles on his right hand.
On July 22nd, 1963, Sonny Liston finally got his rematch against Patterson at the Las Vegas Convention Center. The educated money was on Sonny, but many of the white establishment blindly and ignorantly backed Floyd Patterson. They all should have listened to Joe Louis, who predicted Liston will take out Patterson the first time he hits him. And Sonny himself promised it won't go 5 rounds. In front of a crowd of just under 8,000, the bell rang for the first round, when a voice from ringside shouted, last round, folks. Patterson was floored 3 times and counted out at 2 minutes 10 of the first round. It lasted 4 seconds longer than their first fight. Sonny said after the fight, the public is not with me now, but they will have to swing along for now until somebody else comes along to beat me. As soon as Sonny left the ring, up popped Ali. The fight was a disgrace. Liston is a tramp. I'm the champ. I want that big ugly bear. I want that big bum as soon as I can get him. I'm tired of talking. I want action. If I can't whip that bum, I'll leave the country. I can't whip that bum, I'll leave the country. Sonny did leave the country and embarked on a tour of Europe, accompanied by Geraldine, Nylon, Reddish and a sparring partner, Von Ado Cox. They went from Norway and landed in London around September time, and of course he bumped into the Cray twins, who paid him £500 for a spot of PR at one of their nightclubs. During Sonny's visit of Britain, he dressed like a 1920s Chicago gangster and rode a white horse through Newcastle, wore a kilt in Glasgow, and even had a go on the bagpipes.
So while on these shores, Liston was actually contracted to fight an exhibition at Wembley Arena, which was organised by a very well-known promoter and trainer in Mickey Duff. But this was also written in his contract as well, that he had to have 3 white women a day. We have told this story before, but let's tell it again. So Mickey had no idea of how to go about getting a lady of the night, so to speak. So he asked a nightclub owner to help him to find one. A Scottish girl come forward, happy to spend the night with Liston. The next morning, Mickey Duff went to pick Sonny up for arranged interviews and was greeted by the young girl shouting at Sonny. Now, Duff asked what was wrong, and she said that Sonny had given her £10 for a night's work. Mickey said to Sonny that a tenner isn't a lot of money and that he should give her a bit more. Sonny sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, "Yeah, what about all those sandwiches she ate?" Well, Sonny was very pleased with his visit, obviously, and the extra work that Mickey Duff had made for his sort of other activities. He was quite happy with his visit, and he actually later told a reporter that, "I am warm here because I am among warm people and react to it. When I return to the United States, I will be cold again." And Mike Tyson, well-known historian of boxing. Obviously, we all know Mike Tyson as the fighter, but I think he sort of summed up Sonny's current position at this time when he said that he, as in Sonny, was the black eye of the black community, and that was what he was. He was just shunned by his black community and also by the white community as well. He was a bit of a loner at this point, as he had done after defeating Patterson for the first time. Sonny had one more crack at trying to swing public opinion of himself. So he started to appear on television programs to try and show a different side to him, a better side than the bad boy image that was presented in the newspapers, and it just never worked in his favour. He trusted only those that were close to him, like his wife and close family, and would always be smiling and showing his softer side, and as people have suggested, especially around children.
While waiting in the wings for news on his next opponent, Sonny developed a friendship with Ash Resnick, a Las Vegas casino operator of the Thunderbird and Caesars Hotel and Casino, which was connected to the New York mob. Sonny enjoyed his visits to Vegas during this time, interested in gambling and women rather than training to keep himself in shape. While Sonny was out of state, Ali was in Chicago with a red bus he bought to force a world title fight, and across the top of the bus, in a flamboyant colour, it read, "World's most colourful fighter." Below that, it said, "Liston must go in 8. The fun and games continued when Sonny arrived home in Denver. Ali made an anonymous tip-off to newspapers, radio stations, and the police that he was going to break into Liston's residence at 2 a.m. Sure enough, they all showed up, and Ali remembered. "We started yelling, 'Oink, oink!' Everybody heard. You know how them white people felt about that black man who had just moved in? We didn't help it much. Liston came out after the taunting, but before he could make up his mind what to do, the police told us to leave, or we'd be arrested for disturbing the peace." They didn't leave straight away. First they carried on honking the horn on the bus and knocking on Sonny's door. All the while, Ali was on his lawn shouting about how he is going to whip Liston bad. Ali later claimed that Sonny smashed one of the bus windows in anger while he kept repeating, "You big ugly bear. The policeman and those dogs saved you. You no chump. You a chump. You gonna fall in 8 'cause I'm the greatest." Typical Ali. And another great story in Ali's brash antics to try and force that world heavyweight title fight.
Absolutely superb stuff there from Muhammad Ali. Obviously, still known at the time as Cassius Clay, but we are going to just refer him to Muhammad Ali throughout this. We'll mention the name change, but for us, he's Ali. And he got his wish after forcing the fight on November the 5th, 1963, at Denver's Palace Hotel, was where they signed a contract to fight on February 25th, 1964. So the 5th of November, they signed a contract for the fight to happen in February. And it was going to be held at Miami Beach in Florida. Now, Ali challenged Sonny at this contract signing to get it on now, but Sonny just sat there and grinned. Then, when he could finally get a word in after Muhammad Ali continued shouting his mouth off, he said, "I'll have to start training 5 days before the fight." It was a tongue-in-cheek expression, but there was some truth in that statement. Ash Resnick was becoming a bad influence on Sonny, who was loving Las Vegas and the lifestyle more than preparing for a fight against Ali. It was well known that he never trained properly for this Ali fight, whether it was because he overlooked his younger and fresher opponent or he just had enough, and we'll just never know. Probably a bit of both. Sonny appeared to be taking his training chores rather lightly, and this is Dr. Ferdy Pacheco, Ali's physician, and he actually recalled that Sonny was leisurely, almost cavalier approach, and that he always finished training the same way, saying, "I don't know what I'm training this hard for. I'm going to knock this kid out in one round." Ali was a complete underdog after all, and many felt that he had more mouth than ability. Nobody knew just quite how good or great Muhammad Ali was going to become. A month before the fight, Ali spoke at a national Islam rally in New York City, and as a result was on the front pages of the newspapers. Over the next few weeks, more papers continued to publish reports of Ali's association with the Nation of Islam and was spending a lot of his time with their minister, Malcolm X, who was basically their recruit. The fighter's promoter, Bill McDonald, was angry with Ali's association with the Nation of Islam, and he actually feared it might hurt ticket sales. So he threatened to cancel the fight unless Ali condemned the group, but he refused.
McDonald decided to go ahead with the fight when Malcolm X was persuaded to leave his Miami motel, and Ali agreed not to announce his Muslim affiliation until after the fight. Ali worked himself into a frenzy during the official examination and weigh-in in the day of the fight, which led to the commission actually fining him $2,500. With his heart rate registered at 120 beats per minute, Dr. Alexander Robbins, the chief physician of the Miami Boxing Commission, determined that he was emotionally unbalanced, scared to death, and liable to crack up before he enters the ring. He threatened that if Ali's blood pressure didn't return to normal, the fight would be cancelled. But after a second examination, an hour later, his blood pressure and pulse had returned to normal. It had all been an act, which the press fed into when they printed that they thought he feared Sonny Liston. Ali later confessed, "Liston's not afraid of me, but he's afraid of a nut." The fight was billed by Malcolm X as Christianity versus the Nation of Islam. And he was right. And into the fight, and it began, with Ali showing a lot of movement, using his fast and effective jab and quick combinations, making it difficult for Liston to score with his slower jab and his heavy punches. In the third round, Ali attacked Liston with several combinations that initially created a bruising, but after further punishment it actually burst open. Ali coasted the fourth round and kept his distance. However, when he returned to his corner, he started blinking uncontrollably and complained that there was something burning his eyes and that he could not see. Angelo Dundee rinsed Clay's eyes with a sponge and used his experience to force Ali out, pushing him off his stool to begin the fifth round and telling him to stay away from Liston.
And Dundee recalled on NBC special 25 years later, this is what he said. He said, "I didn't know what the heck was going on." He said, "Cut the gloves off. I want to prove to the world there's a dirty work afoot." And I said, whoa, back up, baby. Come on now, this is for the title. This is the Big Apple. What are you doing? Sit down. So I get him down. I get the sponge. I pour the water into his eyes, trying to cleanse whatever's there. But before I did that, I put my pinky in his eye and I put it to my eye. It burned like hell. There was something caustic in both eyes. After Liston unsuccessfully didn't take advantage of the situation in the fifth, which I must say, if anyone thought that Muhammad Ali didn't have a chin, just check that fifth round. He takes several digs and stays on his feet. Well, after that, Sonny Liston, uncharacteristically, and did not go down well at all, he decided to quit on his stool after the sixth round. Ali obviously sprang to the centre of the ring and did a victory dance with his hands held high. He then quickly ran to the ropes and began yelling those famous words to the media, saying, "I am the greatest and I shook up the world." Many theorised that a substance had been used on Liston's cuts by Joe Polino, who was his cut man, and that may have inadvertently caused the irritation. And Dundee did say that Joe Polino had used Moncel's solution on that cut. Now, what had happened was that probably the kid put his forehead leaning in on the guy because Liston was starting to wear in with those body shots, and my kid sweating profusely, and it went into both eyes. So he feels that it was just, he put it on the cut, and then obviously it's just got into the eyes. The theory that it was done on purpose to disrupt Ali has long been a legend of this fight, with some suggesting that Liston told Polino to smear the solution on his gloves so he could blind Ali. And it also gives Eddie Machen's complaint with his fight with Sonny 4 years earlier a lot more credibility. It stunned everybody when Ali just shook the world. Incredible.
Well, many felt that the mob had actually rigged the fight to make money on betting coups, but this is a little hard to believe, as the odds were actually 8-1 and remained so right up until the night of the fight, which indicates that there were not any large sums of money placed on Ali to win. HBO commentator Larry Merchant also doesn't buy the story of a fix, and he said, why would the mob who controlled Liston want to give up control to Muhammad Ali, to which it had no ties? Where is the evidence of betting coups? I've never seen it. Also, if there was an attempt to try and blind Ali to get an advantage over him, well, it wouldn't make sense if the fight was fixed, so that theory kind of gets dispelled there as well. After the fight, Sonny was taken to St Francis Hospital and emerged hours later with 6 stitches under his left eye and his left arm in a sling. 8 doctors consulted and concluded that he had torn a shoulder muscle and the injury was incapacitating. Dr. Alexander Robbins said, there is no doubt in my mind that the fight should have been stopped. The Miami Beach Boxing Commission ordered Liston's purse withheld after the fight. When asked why, Commission Chairman Maurice Klein said, we just wanted to make sure everything was alright. After the doctor's report, the Commission was satisfied that there was no wrongdoing and allowed Liston to collect his purse. After a month-long investigation, Florida State Attorney Richard E. Gerstein said there was no evidence to support the claim of a fix, and United States Senate Subcommittee conducted hearings 3 months later and found no evidence of a fix. Documents released to the Washington Times in 2014 under the Freedom of Information Act actually show the FBI suspected Sonny's friend, Ash Resnick, of fixing multiple boxing matches, including the first Ali Liston fight. Quite interesting bits of information as the time has gone on and as the years have passed that you find out what Ash Resnick was also up to in the background.
Yeah, and Ash Resnick was a guy that was well known. He owns the Thunderbird. He doesn't own it. He manages it, and this is part of what he does. You know, he's affiliated with it. It ain't the only fight that he would have potentially fixed. I just think it dispels that. I think you're right. I don't think it doesn't make any sense to me. Those documents, though, also the FBI documents, that has also showed that J. Edgar Hoover had actually been following Sonny Liston's career very closely due to his mob affiliations. And it also showed no evidence that Muhammad Ali was ever in on the scheme or even knew about it. And sports writer Jerry Eisenberg of the Newark Star Ledger, who covered the fight from ringside, said, whoever tells you that this was a great gambling coup engineered by the mafia either needs to change whatever it is they're smoking or needs to find out what they're talking about. And I sort of make him right. I think a few people, it's a little bit out there. So on March 6, 1964, Elijah Muhammad announced in a recorded statement played over the radio that Clay would be renamed to Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad means worthy of all praises, while Ali means most high. Now, when Ali and Liston finally signed to fight for a rematch, the WBA actually voted unanimously to strip Ali of his title and drop Liston from their rankings. But the WBC, the New York State Athletic Commission, and the Ring magazine continued to recognize Ali as champion. Pressed by the WBA, which included every US state except California, Nevada, and New York, for state boxing commissions throughout the nation were reluctant to actually license a rematch between the two controversial fighters, and it was difficult for them, of course, to find a venue. Ultimately, Massachusetts agreed to host the bout, which resulted in the suspension of the Massachusetts Boxing Commission by the WBA. The fight was set for November 16, 1964 at the Boston Garden now. While Sonny was training harder than ever, the initial date was unfortunately postponed because Ali suffered a hernia on Friday the 13th of all days, 3 days before the bout. Many observers and boxing experts believe Sonny would have actually won if this original date had have gone forward. In fact, the Time magazine actually wrote that Sonny had worked himself into the best shape of his career.
The fight was rescheduled for May the 25th, 1965, but the FBI began exploring a possible fix for the rematch. Johnny Tocco made a very interesting statement on the 1995 HBO documentary about Liston. He said he spoke with mobster John Vitale before the rematch and was told not to pay any attention to what he had heard about the fight. He also told Tocco that he should be glad that he wasn't going to Lewiston. When Tocco asked why, Vitale told him that the fight was going to end in the first round. Now, there have been many rumours that have surfaced around the second fight. One is that the mob and the Nation of Islam apparently agreed for Liston to take a dive, with Resnick spearheading the negotiations with a plan for Sonny to win a percentage of Muhammad Ali's future purses. The benefit of Ali having the World Heavyweight title was not for any financial gain, but more to do with the status the title brings, and a Muslim being the World Heavyweight Champion was more important to them. As the fight approached, there were fears that the promoters were tied to organised crime, and Massachusetts officials, most notably Suffolk County District Attorney Garrett Byrne, began to have second thoughts. Byrne sought an injunction blocking the fight in Boston, claiming Intercontinental Promotions was promoting the fight without a Massachusetts licence. Intercontinental said local veteran Sam Silverman was the promoter. On May the 7th, backers of the rematch ended the court battle by pulling the fight out of Boston. The promoters needed a new location quickly, whatever the size, to rescue their closed-circuit television commitment around the country. Governor John H. Reed of Maine stepped forward, and within a few hours, the promoters had a new site, Lewiston, Maine, the smallest city to host a heavyweight title bout since Jack Dempsey fought Tommy Gibbons in Shelby, Montana in 1923. It remains the only heavyweight title fight held in the state of Maine.
So 2 months before the rematch, Malcolm X was assassinated on February the 21st, 1965, after being shot once in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun. Although the assassination of Malcolm X had no connection to the fight, his presence in the first alongside Muhammad Ali obviously created many more conspiracy theories on the back end of his murder. Rumours circulated that Ali, who had publicly snubbed Malcolm X after his breakup with Elijah Muhammad, might be killed by Malcolm X's supporters in retaliation. Well, the FBI took those death threats very seriously and posted a 12-man, 24-hour guard around Ali. Sonny Liston's camp, in turn, claimed that he had received a death threat from the Nation of Islam by men dressed in black suits with bow ties. Apparently someone put a gun to his head. People have said this didn't happen. In fact, the Nation of Islam, someone who spoke on behalf of the Nation of Islam, said that he was there and they went to give him a contract for him to sign with the Nation of Islam alongside Ali. So it's up to you what you believe. It was the same guys dressed in the same attire that surrounded Ali that added to the sense of fear and hostility and resulted in high-level security for the fight. Now, due to the remote location and fear of violence, only 2,434 fans were present in a 4,900-seat arena, setting the record for the lowest attendance for a heavyweight championship fight. Now, into the fight, and midway through the first round, Liston threw a left jab, and Ali went over it with his fast right, knocking the former champion down with what is well known now, as we all know it, the Phantom Punch. Sonny Liston went down on his back. He sort of rolled over, got to his right knee, and then fell on his back again. Many in attendance did not see Ali deliver the punch. Some even watched replays. Apparently, Howard Cosell had a footage of it, kept watching it over 100 times, someone said, and they still didn't see it. The fight quickly descended into chaos, with referee Jersey Joe Walcott, who had a hard time getting Ali to his neutral corner. Ali initially stood over Sonny, screaming, get up and fight, you sucker." As Liston attempted to get up, he fell over again before finally returning to his feet, as I've mentioned, with referee Walcott ready to allow the fight to continue. In fact, it did continue, unbeknown to Walcott, and Liston had been counted out. And I think it was Nate Fleischer that stepped in and sort of said, he's out. And the fight was stopped. And Ali again won, and the crowd were clearly not happy, and they chanted the word fix for what some reporters suggest for about an hour after.
Angelo Dundee disagreed, stressing that all those policemen, FBI agents and bulletproof shields got to Sonny, and he was caught. "I believe the pressure got to him," he said. "There has never been a fight less fixed." Sonny refused to use any excuses afterwards and said, "There was only one punch, a short right to the side of my face," he said, pointing to his left cheekbone. "I couldn't hear the count, but it was a good punch. I have been hit harder, though, by Cleveland Williams. Did he quit? No, I did not. Was he thinking of retirement? I don't know." 2 years later, Sonny admitted this: "Ali knocked me down with a sharp punch. I was down but not hurt, but I looked up and saw Ali standing over me. Ali is waiting to hit me. The referee can't control him. I had to put one knee and one glove on the canvas to get up. You know Ali is a nut. You can tell what a normal man is going to do, but you can't tell what a nut is going to do. And Ali is a nut. Following Liston's second defeat to Ali, he was even more ridiculed from the public, named a coward after the first for quitting on his stool, and a sellout for the second fight for supposedly taking a dive. He was right at the bottom of the scrap heap. To escape from the public scrutiny, and America as a whole, Sonny and Geraldine moved to Sweden, where he fought 4 times in Stockholm and Gothenburg, and he said, "I like Sweden. Its people appreciate boxing. I hope to remain here for at least 2 more bouts. I would like to face Carl Mildenberger and Floyd Patterson, who are popular here. Then I'm certain I'll be ready to face Clay in another championship match if he's still the title holder." And of course, Sweden, well, they like Sonny.
It makes you wonder why he did stay there, really, as long as he could. The reason for the move out of America was obviously because his licenses had actually been revoked by all the commissions. The Boxing Society was disgusted with him. The Denver cops hated him, and he was being stitched up with income tax problems and unpaid earnings. It was just, he never really got any. I mean, when he was all cut up into pieces, he never got much. Sonny had some money left, though, from the Lewiston fight, but he had not been paid for that Miami Beach fight. If he fought in America, the government would take his money anyway, so there was no use in making matches there. The nylons had now disappeared, and even the mob cut their ties because they could no longer protect him from the amount of heat that surrounded him, apart from a certain Ash Resnick. Now, while in Sweden, Sonny stopped all 4 of his opponents, Gerald Zek, Amos Johnson, Dave Bailey and Elmer Rush, in 17 rounds of a possible 40. He arrived home in the summer of 1967, and Joe Polino was now acting as his manager, who acted as manager in Sweden, actually attacked the system for forcing Sonny into exile, saying Liston accompanies a position without precedent in professional boxing history. He stands barred on reportedly powerful evidence connecting him with unsavory characters, and yet no presentable evidence at all. He appears to be barred for losing. Well, Sonny and Geraldine decided to now move from Denver to Las Vegas into a $50,000 split-level home on Ottawa Street, which, looking in hindsight, was not the best of ideas. During the late 60s, when Sonny Liston moved to Vegas, the mob still obviously had its hold on the strip, but it was legal gambling. But there were up against the corporate companies who were headed by Howard Hughes at the Desert Inn and a guy called Kirk Kokonian, who built the International Hotel. It was these businessmen who were starting to force the mob out of Vegas, but Vegas was still pretty much in the mob's hands, and Vegas was also deeply segregated. It was violent and still very much corrupt during those years.
The West Side was more for the black community, but the East was more for the whites. Although the East Side was still booming, the race riots at the end of the 60s destroyed the West Side, so many homes were burnt out, with hotels and casinos run down, and it became a dark and seedy part of Vegas, with crime at an all-time high. The Las Vegas lifestyle suited Sonny. He wasn't bothered by the police as much as he was in St. Louis or Philadelphia or even Denver. He was pretty much left alone. The trouble was, he began to live a double life. He would often mingle with the stars like Sammy Davis Jr. and Joe Louis on the east side of Vegas before jumping in to his white Cadillac and driving over to the dark, shady side of Vegas on the west. Sonny did continue to fight during this time in his career, and California welcomed Sonny back to the ring for the first time in America in 3 years on March 16, 1968. He knocked out Bill McMurray in the 4th round of his American comeback in Reno and was paired with Cincinnati's Billy Joyner in LA 2 months later, knocking him out in the 7th. Then in July 1968 on national television in San Francisco's half-empty Cow Palace, Sonny stopped Henry Clark in 7 rounds to move him into the top 10 of the Ring magazine rankings. There were also 4 quick demolitions inside 2 months. First, Sonny Moore made it as far as the 3rd in Phoenix, Willis Earls as far as the 2nd in Mexico. In Pittsburgh, a crowd of just over 4,000 watched Sonny dispose of Roger Risher in the 3rd, and then in Baltimore, Sonny stepped in the ring with his old mate, Amos Big Train Lincoln. The Ring's John Hort joked, Liston picked up his coffee and donut money for the year, after a left hook finished Lincoln in round 2.
Back in the top 10. Lovely. And Sonny's winning streak continued in 1969 with 3 more victories against Billy Joyner, George Johnson and Sammy Moore to take the stretch to 14 wins on the bounce following his loss to Muhammad Ali, albeit against weaker opposition. Sonny had got himself into a decent position in the rankings and still dreamed of becoming the world champion once again. While looking for another big fight, he had the young Olympic champion George Foreman join him as a sparring partner, and Foreman, well, he idolised Liston, and we've done the Foreman career profile. We talk at great length about their relationship. He was even starting to change the public's perception of him by featuring in a few movies, TV programs and commercials. And behind the sudden appearances on TV was, of course, Sammy Davis Jr. and Ed Sullivan, creator of the Ed Sullivan Show, which was hugely popular television variety program in America back then. And they actually became friends and had a better influence on Sonny. With their backing and star credibility, they were able to help him gain more support and, more importantly for Sonny, to get another big fight. With the comeback firmly on, Sonny was matched against Leotis Martin for the first NABF World Heavyweight title at the International Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas on December 6, 1969. Liston actually knocked Martin on the seat of his pants in the 4th round with his trademark left hook to the jaw, and he was up quickly. It didn't appear to be badly hurt. With Sonny ahead on points, Martin unexpectedly knocked out Liston in the 9th round with a vicious right that followed with a left hook and another right. Liston went down flat on his face and was counted out. Dick Sadler, Sonny's manager, said after the defeat, maybe Sonny Liston will get a title shot now that we lost today, because we sure couldn't get one while he was winning.
Sonny retreated to Vegas with that bad influence, Ash Resnick, never too far away. Amongst all the positive influences that had come into his life, Sonny wasn't able to shake off his dark past, teaming up with Robert Chudnik, aka Red Rodney, and his son Mark, to become an enforcer and a collector. Sonny began taking cocaine and working closely with the drug dealer Red Rodney, who was also a famous jazz trumpet player. By 1970, dealer Rodney started to believe that Sonny was actually untrustworthy. Partly, some suggest, because of the raid at Earl Cage's house, another convict in Vegas who was a beautician by day and cocaine peddler by night. Sonny fell out with Red Rodney, which led to an altercation between Sonny and Mark while Rodney was out of town. Mark said that Sonny had pushed past him and went rambling through their apartment and left. 2 days later, Red Rodney returned and told Mark not to hang with Sonny no more because his days are numbered. Earl Cage was also suspected to have wanted Sonny killed for being a possible snitch and put a contract out on his life in 1969. Reason being, when Earl's home was raided by the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, also known as the BNDD, and the Las Vegas police, everybody was arrested, other than Sonny, leaving Cage very suspicious. Although Sonny wasn't arrested, he was being investigated by the DEA. They planned a sting operation where they would send in an undercover DEA agent, buy whatever Sonny was selling, and then arrest him, with the further ambition of having him wired up in future drug deals. But that plan never materialised.
So moving on to June 29th, 1970, and Sonny Liston headed off to the Armory in Jersey City, New Jersey, to take on Chuck Wepner in front of a crowd of just over 4,000, who paid a gross gate of $37,600. Sonny was guaranteed $13,000 and Wepner $3,900, but he would have made nothing if the gate had never have topped the $30,000. It was a bloody affair. Wepner hit the deck from a right to the body in the 5th round, but the fight was eventually stopped due to severe cuts over both of Wepner's eyes. Afterwards, he required 72 stitches, suffered a broken nose and a cracked left cheekbone. This was Sonny Liston's last professional fight. He ended his career with a record of 50 wins, 39 by way of knockout and 4 defeats. After his 50th win, Sonny said, "I would quit boxing if I had another source of income. I hope some promoter can get me Jerry Quarry next." So he's still looking for big fights. Well, the rumour of this fight, again, as legend has it, is that Sonny was actually told to take a dive against Wepner. But the fight just went horribly wrong because Wepner was cut so badly and it ended up getting stopped before Sonny could find the time to drop and take a dive. The idea does make sense because, look, once his earnings were divided up, 10,000 was paid towards a loan and another 3,000 went to his cornerman. So Liston actually fought his last ever fight for nothing. For much of 1970, the world heavyweight scene was all about Ali and his return to the ring during his exile, refusal to enroll in the Vietnam War, and the current champion was Joe Frazier, who picked up the titles during his suspension. Now, this is the time where Sonny is rumoured to have let leak of the secret deal that apparently many spoke about. He was very vocal about being frozen out of his percentage of Ali's $5 million earnings for his return against Frazier in that fight of the century.
While in a barbershop in Vegas, Sonny apparently gloated that he was supposed to collect a cut of Ali's future purses after purposely taking a dive in their second fight. Apparently, he had a public altercation with Ash Resnick about when is he going to get his cut. He was alleged to have been mouthing off to those that would listen about how he was owed money for the Ali Frazier fight. Then on January the 5th, 1971, Geraldine spent Christmas period at her family's in St. Louis. She attempted to contact Sonny numerous times over the holidays, but it was to no avail. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as Sonny would often go AWOL, but after almost a week of trying, she became worried and decided to leave her family to go home. When she returned, she was greeted with an awful smell, thinking Sonny had left food on the stove. So she went into the kitchen, only to realise that this wasn't the case. She followed that smell up to the bedroom and found Sonny Liston, aged 40, dead on their bed with his body in a terrible state of decomposition. Geraldine rushed to her friend's house who lived locally and asked them to call not the police, but a doctor. Sometime between 10 and 11 p.m, they returned to the house, but didn't officially call the police until just before midnight. Many theorised that Geraldine spent that time in between discovering the body of Sonny Liston, then not calling the police, removing any drugs that was in the property, and she would have known that Sonny was a dealer, and she would have surely known where he hid his gear. What is even more bizarre is that when the police did arrive just before midnight following the doctor pronouncing Sonny Liston as dead, a small balloon of heroin was actually found in plain view in the kitchen.
Well, the question is, if Geraldine did spend those last sort of couple of hours getting rid of Liston's drugs, then I'm sure she would never have missed that small ball of heroin in the kitchen. Shauna Sell came up with the most plausible explanation, and that is that the corrupt police, which they were back then, you can pretty much gather that evidence yourself, that they planted the heroin so they could obtain a search warrant, as Sonny had been on record being a dealer. So obviously, they've planted it, and then they can try and get the drugs. Obviously, they found them. So Geraldine had successfully cleaned out the property. I mean, these are all rumours, but it does seem to suggest this. The suspected cause of death was actually a heroin overdose, or many felt it was a fatal hot shot administered by someone else. Now, the coroner decided that Sonny died of natural causes. His verdict was fluid on the lungs, which he attributes to syndrome X, where the blood doesn't flow to the heart, resulting in a cardiac arrest. He also found heroin metabolites in the body, which is not by any means the main root of the cause of death, because the body can generate these metabolites when in a terrible state of decomposition. The Vegas police were quick to give their verdict of a heroin overdose as the cause of death without investigating the matter any further. And then during the 1970s, one of mafia's favourite execution tactics was in fact the lethal injection of heroin. It was later discovered that Liston was actually petrified of needles, so if he had a heroin addiction, as some also suggested, then he would never have taken the drug by taking the needle. He would have used it in a different means, which makes it harder to overdose. He did have puncture holes in his arm, which is a clear indication that a needle was used. However, Sonny was in a car accident a couple of weeks before he died, which could explain the ones that had been scabbed over. Because I think what they're saying is the scabbed over one says a user, but in actual fact, it looked like from this accident. After inspecting the body and collecting evidence like the newspapers that had stacked up by the door. They gave an indication of the time it was last seen. Sonny's time of death was concluded to be somewhere around New Year's Eve in 1970.
Now, barring the obvious suspects we have mentioned, as in Ash Resnick, Earl Cage and Red Rodney, Dale Klein, aka James John Warjack, is the only suspect that admitted to know about how Sonny Liston was murdered. Now, he had been in and out of jail for half of his life, and he was on the FBI's most wanted list, and he was a fugitive who had been on the run for 5 years after a Texas jailbreak. While in prison, he said that a mob hitman admitted he had helped kill Sonny via an enforced heroin overdose. He explained the role he played in both Sonny Liston's death and that of a showgirl who had wed a Texas oilman, depriving his family of a handsome inheritance, another enforced overdose. Now, following Klein's death in 1997, his son, Greg Swarm, flew to Los Angeles to retrieve his personal effects, and he ran across the business card of a movie producer who turned out to be a mob insider connected to Frank Sinatra. The producer advised him to let it lie. Too many people are still alive who won't want you to know about this. Your life will be in danger. A police informant, Erwin Peters, is another guy that told police he had been offered a contract on Sonny Liston's life but refused it, which was offered by none other than Ash Resnick. Peters, ironically, was found dead under mysterious circumstances himself after fleeing for his life from Vegas following the statement to Oregon. He died from an accidental carbon monoxide poisoning, apparently inhaling the fumes from his car exhaust pipe, which was damaged. And that concludes the story of Sonny Liston. And there's so many talking points to run through before the end of this episode. Firstly, the obvious elephant in the room is his death. We've suspected so many different things on this, and we've covered a lot of this in the darker side of boxing, but we will go over it briefly again for the benefit of you guys listening here for Career Profiles. And I think we always felt like he was murdered, and we've always maintained that based on the evidence that was there and the suspicious circumstances and the tampering of a crime scene quite clearly. There's obviously foul play involved in Sonny Liston's death, and it's a mystery that has been going on for over 50 years now, and we've still not really got that ultimate conclusion, and I don't ever think we will get that ultimate conclusion. But I think for most people, whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not, there's too much damning information there for me to say it's anything other than Sonny Liston was taken out. And
I agree with you. We went into quite a lot of detail still there right at the end. You can't not. So a lot of the stuff we've run over already. I do think that the one thing we didn't mention was Mark's own words, which was Red Rodney's son. He actually said that, to stay away from Sonny because, he's basically a marked man, just stay away. He doesn't want his boy around him because he knows someone's going to get him. There was also with this Earl Cage, apparently he likes to bide his time before finally getting someone, which he did because he absolutely felt that that Sonny had ratted him out. And the FBI investigator actually, when I watched one of those documentaries, actually did say as well that it did look very suspicious. Honestly, I think that Earl Cage wanted to get rid of him, and Red Rodney knew it. And I think Ash Resnick was also not happy with his mouthing off. And there was a lot of heat on Ash Resnick as well. The FBI were watching him. There's a lot of information from FBI papers, documents that suggest, conversations. That's how we know that they had this disagreement a few times. So the FBI were watching him. He didn't like that pressure. He's putting unwanted pressure on him. He had major links to Meyer Lansky. He was a friend of his. It's just so much that suggests that it's going to happen. You've got a guy that openly admits he knows someone has done it. I think what there was a contract. I think Earl Cage was going to kill him anyway, and then he probably found out there's a contract out, and someone took the contract, and Sonny was murdered. I think that's clearly what happened.
So moving away from any conspiracy theories or thoughts on what we think happened to Sonny, with it being our Career Profiles podcast, let's focus on his actual boxing career to end this episode and talk about his career and talk about where he got to. Obviously, we talked about earlier in the episode and the story of Sonny, of how ferocious and feared he was in the boxing ring, and how Costa Amato kept Patterson away from him for as long as he possibly could because he knew Sonny would destroy him. And ultimately he does, not once but twice, and retains that heavyweight title that he wins from Patterson. And then obviously Clay comes along, or Ali comes along, and ruffles his feathers. And to me, it's evident looking back at it now that he obviously gets under Sonny's skin, and Sonny doesn't train because he overlooks him. It's quite evident that also happens as well. But then he trained so hard for that rematch that it was unfortunate that it never happened on the original date, because who knows, history could have gone a completely different way. We'll never know that now. But I think once it got to that point, and that was rescheduled, I think he must have lost his motivation. He must have done. For him then to go into that second fight and lose how he did. And I'm not going to focus too much on that phantom punch. I honestly believe it was a punch that landed. It was just that quick that we couldn't see it. Did he take a dive? Well, I'll leave that open to interpretation and let everybody have their own thoughts on that. And I'm sure people will put their comments on the YouTube channel and on the podcast, and they will probably say what they feel happened there. But I think the amount of first-hand accounts that we've had, the amount of people that were involved with it, the amount of people that were there when it happened, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying that it was a punch that landed, it wasn't expected, Sonny couldn't recover from it, and that's an open and shut case. But many people will go on for years to come that it was rigged, and there was so many different elements that could have caused it to be rigged. And if you believe that's fine, but having looked at this case so many times, I honestly think it was just a case of he got caught by a punch that he couldn't see coming.
Yes, it's an interesting one. I mean, I do sort of watching that back again and seeing him. I think he does get caught with it. I think he does go down. I think for me, the one thing I will say is the way he sort of rolls over and goes to get back up again. I think that just looks suspicious. That's just my honest opinion. Whether it's a matter of someone said to him to stay down, or if it was just he thought, I can't, you know what, I just don't, even if I win this, what does it matter? Which is one thing we always, recognise in Sonny's life. That moment he wins that world title from Floyd Patterson, arrives in Philadelphia, planning speeches, and there's great stuff from the reporter he spoke to, and then just the heartache of no one being there other than paid press is just shit for him. And I think from that point, that was it for Sonny. He thought, I'm done trying. What is the point in this? And that's what he did. And he finds, next thing you know, he finds Vegas, he finds Ash Resnick again. He was always in a difficult situation, Sonny, always, from the point sort of being early released from prison and just literally planted into the hands of John Vitale. I mean, the guy is very close with Frankie Carbo. And the fact that he bashes up a police officer and he's released in 9 months? I mean, you telling me a black guy beats up a white policeman back in them days, and they're going down for the rest of their life. I mean, we done Reuben Carter. I mean, he didn't even do anything. Look how long he went down for. There's so much evidence suggests that he was pulled into the mob hands as a young boy, and he just never had any other chance. I'll just ask you this, Sean. If it was you, you've got lashed, you got whipped by your dad as a youngster. You go to St. Louis to find your mum. She doesn't really want you around. She's happy to see you, but it's another mouth to feed. So you're on the streets. You mugging people. It's the only way to get through in life, to eat. You end up in prison. You find boxing, and then you get presented to a mob guy that says to you, look, I'm going to look after you. I'm going to pay you money. I'm going to feed you. And you could potentially be a boxing world champion. Do you say, no, I'm not going to go down that road, I'm just going to stick it out in prison? Of course you're not. I mean, what chance did Sonny Liston ever have, Sean?
Well, this is it. He didn't. He had a really, really terrible upbringing, a really difficult upbringing. Not getting the sense that he felt very loved from that upbringing as well. And then he goes straight into the hands of someone who gives him the promise of sending him into a professional boxing career with the promise of this money and a potential world heavyweight title down the line in the future. Somebody who's got nothing, who may be seemingly a little bit desperate, is going to take that opportunity. A desperate man went to desperate measures, and he took that opportunity to go with the mob. Whether he knew it was mob or whether he didn't is another question. But even if he did, he felt obviously like he had no choice but to go down that route, and that's what he did. Now, in terms of his boxing career, could he have done so much more in it? There's the other question about Sonny. Could he have come back really from that second defeat to Ali if he was highly motivated? Could he have come back and won a heavyweight title again? Now, looking at the fights he had, he was on a great winning streak. And it looked like he was on the verge of maybe getting that before he gets knocked out by Leotis Martin. And once he loses that, it seemingly feels like his career's pretty much over from that point onwards, because, you know, he's a lot older at this point, bearing in mind, and nobody's really interested. What value does he bring to the promoters? He's a former heavyweight champion. The interpretation or perception of him is a disgraced former world heavyweight champion. Nobody's going to see the value in putting him in another world heavyweight title shot. So it's sad, really, that he never got the opportunity to fight for a world title again, given the situation he was in. And again, it all boils down to his affiliations, the fact that he was probably a high risk, low reward kind of case where people didn't want to see their man get beaten by a guy like Sonny Liston. So I think he was thwarted at all opportunities, at all avenues. If it wasn't because of his mob affiliations, it was because he was too much of a danger to put in against an up-and-coming talent around that time. Why would you want to throw one of your guys in there with him when he's such a danger to them, regardless of whether you think he's motivated or not? So it was sad that his career had to sort of take that little bit of a nosedive after that second Ali fight. But during the time that he was rising up the ranks and during the time that he becomes world heavyweight champion, he's ferocious. He's labelled as one of the great heavyweight champions of all time. Whether you like that statement or you don't, people in boxing regard him as one of them because of what he did in his short tenure as an upcoming fighter and a world heavyweight champion. He put fear into the eyes of his opponents. He gave that same effect that Mike Tyson gave in the 80s when he'd won that battle before he'd even got in the ring. Mike Tyson even says he takes a lot of that mental preparation for his career from Sonny Liston by studying a fighter like Sonny Liston. You hear Tyson talk about Liston with so much admiration for him. So his lasting legacy on boxing, whilst it might be shrouded in a lot of controversy, take away the controversy, take away the mob affiliation, and you've got a guy that really, I think, needs to be a little bit more respected for his boxing ability and his actual career than what he is because of that controversy.
I absolutely agree with you. He was the first one, as you rightly put it, to strike fear in an opponent before they even stepped in the ring. I mean, we've done Jack Johnson, and other fighters were a little bit like that with Jack Johnson. Sonny was like the next one. He was the real feared one, though, wasn't he? The press didn't like him. He was always the bad guy. And no wonder why Mike Tyson tapped into that. And then obviously you had a young George Foreman that learned from that, took on other advice and sort of went down the same route. And then we get the birth of Mike Tyson. Sort of those three boxers right there followed that same pattern, but it practically comes from Sonny Liston. And Sonny Liston as a fighter was absolutely ferocious. I mean, you look at the three guys, he absolutely demolishes Zora Foley, demolishes Cleveland Williams in a great short fight. That as well was in bags of trouble in that first round, and then Williams eventually gets rid of him, and also Eddie Machen, he outpoints him. And you're talking about guys there that almost a bit like the Murderers Row lot, where they just weren't. Floyd Patterson ain't going near these guys, not why he's got the title, not while Cass is in his corner. Cass was a bit like Mick was in Rocky, you know. You want to stay away from him, you know. He guided him as a world champion, making him think he's better than he was. No disrespect to Floyd, because Floyd was a very good fighter, exceptional fighter. He was nowhere near as good as Sonny. Sonny should have had that title probably a lot sooner. And a lot of people felt, because he was just so ferocious, wasn't he? I mean, it was knocking people out of his jab, knocking teeth out. Like, I think it's two different opponents where he literally knocked out their teeth. I mean, we talk about what Jack Johnson done with Stanley Ketchel. He knocked out his teeth. He knocked out about 8 teeth from one other fella, from a jab. I mean, these guys were getting not just knocked out, they were getting knocked unconscious. I mean, that I can't remember the guy, and he literally had never been down before, and he knocks him out cold, flat on his face. His power was unbelievable. He was a fantastic puncher with great jab, big right hands. And again, I mean, it just proves you know, Muhammad Ali, when he was Cassius Clay, that first fight, and he's getting thumped foot on the face in that 5th round, and he takes it. It just shows you how much of a chin he had, because no one could stand up to that. Yeah, I think it's just a shame that it he didn't get that title shot a little bit sooner against Patterson, where he's messing about with Johansson. I think he should have got that title shot earlier, and he would have been a champion for a few more years. I think he would have been a little bit more respected before, obviously, Muhammad Ali come on the scene. But yeah, he's definitely one of the best heavyweights of all time. I know that the picture is always painted about how his mysterious death and that, but it just adds to the story with him. But one thing I will say is he's just a likable guy. No matter what the press painted of him, I don't get that impression. Everybody says how much of a nice guy. He was a very kind guy. It was just the picture that was painted of him. And, he even said himself, if I could do something else, he would have done. He would anything else other than boxing, he would have done something else. But it was just, he could, it's a great career profile. Though. I'm pleased we've managed to get a career profile on Sonny. I know we've gone a little bit over the darker side of boxing side of it, that element, but I think we have touched a lot on his career.
Yeah, we do hope you enjoy this episode, and please do let us know on social media. You can do that on Twitter at career_profiles or across all the other channels, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. BTR Boxing Podcast Network is the main channels for them. Please do go and leave us a comment when you see it posted. Retweet it, share it on Facebook. However you want to do it, please do it, because it really truly helps, and we really hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Also, a big shout out to the patrons of the podcast who will have access to this earlier than everybody else. Thank you for all your support in bringing our podcast up to the next level. Thank you so much as always. Fight fans, we hope you've enjoyed this episode all about the mysterious, the incomparable Sonny Liston.